IB Nation, welcome back to the Irish Breakdown Podcast. Ryan Roberts, Shaun Davis for the last time. Notre Dame Recruiting Hour here on a Monday, folks. We're going to talk about the 2025 class and give you guys a little bit of the latest. And obviously that is centered around two different position groups. We're going to be talking about wide receiver, the latest, and what it would mean for Notre Dame to have a strong stretch, and what also it would mean if Notre Dame misses. So we're going to give you both sides to the wide receiver conversation. We're also going to talk linebackers. Notre Dame is in shouting's distance, rock throw of a elite class and potentially the best linebacker haul that Notre Dame has ever had, or not ever had, but had in a very, very long time. So we'll talk about that, what's on stake with linebacker recruiting. And then since this is my last recruiting hour show, we wanted to do something a little bit different, a little bit more of a wide scope conversation, okay? Of when I started at Irish Breakdown officially in January 2022, the Marcus Freeman era was just getting kicked off. We were learning about him as far as what he wanted recruiting-wise on both sides of the football. So wide scope. What is Marcus Freeman's recruiting strategy built upon? We're going to take that from an offensive and defensive perspective. And also, what is something that we still want to see change, figured out, things that need to still be processed and done differently? So we're going to talk all that. Of course, joined by Shaun Davis, co-host of the Lucky Lefty podcast. Shaun, how are you, my friends?
Hey, I'm good, Double R. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, man. As you can see, Shaun is live on location at a golf range, right? Is that where you're at? You're at a golf club right now?
This is my dad's annual golf classic. So once again, we're at River Oaks Golf Course, Calumet City, honoring him, continuing his foundation and everything that he gives back to the community. So it's been a great day so far, man. It's been an absolutely great day, but I'm stoked about doing this show.
Yeah. Absolutely, man. Well, Shaun, my question to start us out with, because I always have to ask you how you are before we get going, but there was a heated conversation in the chat because we are just days away now until NCAA football 2025 coming out, Shaun. And there was a heated debate when we were early on in the chat here of PlayStation versus Xbox, Shaun. I wanted to ask you how you come down on this. Are you a PlayStation guy or are you an Xbox guy?
I'm forever a Sony guy. So yeah, PlayStation for me.
You're smart, man. This is why I know I like you, Shaun, okay? This is always a PlayStation over Xbox conversation, my friend. Absolutely. Second question I have for you, Shaun. Second question. There was a On3 recruiting ranking updates, and lo and behold, Deuce Knight up to number 28 overall player in the 2025 class. Shaun, it feels, and you correct me if I'm wrong, it feels like there is justification there on that recruiting ranking for what Deuce Knight has been doing this offseason, my friends.
Well, we expected him to start the climb.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I expected him to start the climb massively. I said this, Shaun, I don't know if you agree with this, but like I had said after he had his Elite 11 performance, it's only a matter of time before he's a 5-star by somebody, right?
Yeah,
so number 28 on 3, I would be surprised as long as Deuce has a strong senior year if he is not a 5-star when all is said and done.
He needs to be made a 5-star right now. I think he's done enough at the 3 elite camps, including the Elite 11. I don't know. It's probably a Notre Dame bias holding it up somehow, some way, if you want to believe in that. But other than that, this young man, ultimately, there's only other one quarterback that I would take maybe above him in that class. So he definitely deserves to be a 5-star. He deserves to be top 20, in my opinion. We're going to just talk about pure talent and upside.
Oh, pure talent. I mean, I could argue that Deuce Knight is a top 10 overall player in the 2025 class if this was just based upon talents. But yeah, I mean, it's a Bryce Underwood, George McIntyre. I mean, it's a really good quarterback class in 2025, as is the same in 2026. But I am very happy with where Notre Dame is at with 2025 quarterback recruiting, obviously. So, Shaun, we're finishing up the 2025 class. Notre Dame is a very limited board that is still up there, right? Obviously, with the pending decision of Ivan Taylor, there's a safety that we know about that's going to be on the board for Notre Dame if he does end up, decommitting and flipping. There is a linebacker board and there's a wide receiver board, and that's really the only boards that we're going to talk about at this point, for the 2025 class moving forward. Let's start with wide receiver, because this is the one, Shaun. This is volatile, man. Very, very volatile, because let's frame it this way, and then we're going to talk about this a little bit more in depth later. Mike Brown was not put into the best position with wide receiver recruiting. He wasn't. I mean, let's call it what it is. Chancey Stuckey, last couple months, had done bare minimum on the recruiting trail, and they fell behind with a lot of really good wide receivers on the board. Also, Coach Stuckey had made a decision of not choosing to recruit Cooper Perry early on in the process. They went cold on Dalen McCutcheon, who's a really talented receiver in the class. They even went cold. We don't talk about this player a lot, Shaun, but there was a time where Taz Williams out of Red Oak in Texas had made an unofficial to Notre Dame, like 2 years ago now, I guess, at this point, or not this past Blue Gold game, the one before. He came on his own time, and he was planning a trip again, despite barely having been hearing from the Notre Dame recruiting class. So that's 3 wide receivers just off the top of my head that Notre Dame had some traction with early on, a lot of traction with early on. And Coach Stuckey and the staff had chosen we're not going to go that route, obviously, right? And as long as it all worked out, I'm okay with that. Like I was not a fan of the Cooper Perry thing. I was not a fan of the Dalen McCutcheon thing, but there was a universe where it all could have worked out. But with hindsight being 2020, as of now, that limited options on the board. So all that say is that Mike Brown walked into a board that was a mess. It was all over the place. It was a little bit in shambles. Okay. He had to work quickly to try to get back in with guys like Derek Meadows, Talon Taylor, some others, right? And obviously Derek is still on the board, and we'll talk about him. But Shaun, I mean, it wasn't a great situation to walk into. It wasn't. So Notre Dame has commitments, obviously, from Elijah Burris. They have commitments from Jerome Bettis Jr., but there are 3 wide receivers that are very, very important that are still on the board. And we are going to be able to tell a lot about Mike Brown very quickly, Shaun, for how he's able to close down the stretch, man, because a lot's on his plate, a lot of pressure, but he has a chance to show some people like, hey, I can close with the big boys.
Well, we talked about it last week. He's shown a lot just being able to get these guys from not having any contact or limited contact to actually visiting unofficially and then coming back for official visits. That is a win within itself. But now it's time to close, right? This wide receiver room, the guys you have on the board, I would say the players they have on the board might not be tier 1, but they're definitely tier 1B, tier 2 type receivers if you're looking at rankings and how people really view them.
Right.
But they fit what Notre Dame needs in the room. And that's the most important thing. So will they be able to close? We'll get to the Tanuk Hines situation. We'll talk about Derek Meadows, and we'll talk about all of these things. But I think one of the big picture things that we're going to talk about when we get to the end of the show is what has changed in wide receiver recruiting. I'm sure we're going to get to that as well. But yeah, Mike Brown definitely has a chance to change some narratives in the next couple of weeks.
Yep. And part of the narrative that he's trying to change is not his own faults, but he does have a chance to make a statement that, like, hey, even in a recruiting class that I came in kind of halfway and I had to reassemble a board, that I can close down the stretch. So I'm really hoping that we have a strong finish here, Shaun. But let's talk about where things are currently now moving down the stretch, okay? So we have Tanuk Hines, who you mentioned, 2025, Houston, Texas, Dekaney High School. Very interesting recruitment this has been, Shaun. I mean, I feel like Notre Dame now has kind of been the leader for several weeks, if not a couple months. I mean, we talked about it when he took his unofficial visit to Notre Dame for the first time this offseason. Things could not have gone better. I mean, Notre Dame went from kind of an afterthought in that recruitment to one of the big players in a single visit. And then he went to the official visit in June, and I felt like Notre Dame kicked it out of the park. He threw what's the word? Hit it out of the park. What? Kicked it out of the park. Hit it out of the park on that visit as well. And at that point, I was ready. I mean, confidence level has been like a 7.5, which means Notre Dame is well above a 50-50 chance to land Tanuk Hines. But you knew that there was one school for sure, but then there was another school that has really entered the fold recently. So, and the reason that this one's a little bit of a weird one, Shaun, is that there was a report a couple weeks ago that Tanuk might be making a decision literally today, July 8th. Now, barring something changing, I don't expect a decision to be made. And I know there's some speculation. Some people are talking about, I've seen reports about there was a bad, there's been bad weather in Houston, like a hurricane that I think is kind of interrupting some things. But regardless, I can only speak of what I know. And that what I know is that I would be kind of surprised at this point if Tanuk Hines didn't make a decision today, right? So that's what we know. Now, why that's important is because a lot of things are changing around us with the Tanuk Hines situation, okay? So I think Notre Dame is still, I will say this, still the leader today. I think they are still the leader. But one, Texas has been the main player, okay? Texas has been the main player on top of Notre Dame. Texas now has a slightly smaller wide receiver board. They lost out on DeCarrion Moore, who committed to Oregon. So now they're pulling from a smaller board just in general, right? So Texas becomes more of a threat now, in my opinion. But the big one that we talked about last week, USC has come in with a huge NIL deal, like huge NIL offer to Tanuk Hines. Now, knowing Tanuk to the level I do, and people around him to the level I do, okay, I'm not necessarily sold that a NIL offer is going to be the end-all, be-all for Tanuk Hines to make a decision. I actually do think that Notre Dame's long-term pitch and everything involved can outweigh that, okay? But all that is to say here is that I still feel Notre Dame is the leader, but now there's more to sort through, right? It's the Texas and a smaller board, more of a hard push, and then it's also USC, the NIL opportunities, that type of thing. And Brandon also mentioned something that's interesting in this recruitment as well, is that his teammate Nick Townsend, who's the tight end defensive end that Notre Dame had offered as well, is trending towards Texas as well, Shaun. So I think that Notre Dame is still the leader, but I do think this one is going to be a battle down the stretch for Tanuk Hines because USC, Texas, they're not going away.
Yeah, sometimes you have to suffer some things to finally get to your destination. And this is something that Notre Dame is going to have to go through, right? They have to deal with, unfortunately, who knew that this storm, it's not even August, which is the season for storms to hit the Southwest, and it happened early. A lot of people locally, I read a couple of stories saying that's one of the major reasons that he pushed the decision date back. But, I feel comfortable where Tanuk stands, and the fact that moving forward, I think Notre Dame has done so much to get to this point that it's hard to really feel negative unless he just opens up and says, I'm going to carry things into the fall. Like if that was him pushing it back to the fall, I would be worried. But just him pushing it back a couple of days or a week or so, I still feel confident.
Yeah, and I don't think that this one is going to get pushed back to the fall, to your point, Shaun. I think this is still going to be a summer decision. It's obviously just anytime you're the leader and things get pushed back, that makes you feel unsettled, obviously, for easy to understand reasons. When you are the leader, you want things to end as quick as possible. When you're not the leader, you want things to kind of play out a little bit more. Give us a little bit more time, give us more opportunities. Let's build a relationship a little bit longer. That's kind of the vantage point of how recruiting can trend dependent upon like time frames, if that makes sense. Let's now talk about Dylan Robinson, Shaun. This one is another really interesting, fascinating one. He is the wide receiver out of Laverne, California, Bonita High School, same high school as Noah McHale, the 2025 linebacker that Notre Dame loved that committed to Texas A&M. Dylan Robinson's a really unique one, Shaun. I believe everything about Dylan Robinson says Notre Dame in the sense of family life, academics, long-term versus short-term, like everything kind of points to Notre Dame. But here's the thing, okay? Here is the thing about Dylan. There's been a big push on both sides of the ball by various schools. So kind of the push for Notre Dame has always been a wide receiver. The push for Washington, which is the other big opponent here, has been defensive back. And recently they've also added in that he could play some wide receiver potentially. So more of an athlete type of push, but more on the defensive side of the ball regardless. UCLA has just been defense. Defense, Dylan, that's what you're going to play. I think UCLA, after having a strong footing over the last week or two, I think it's faded on UCLA at this point. I think UCLA is still in the fight, Shaun. They're definitely still a top 3 school for Dylan Robinson, but I do think right now this is a Notre Dame-Washington battle as of today. Washington, because after the official visit to Notre Dame, I was feeling great about Notre Dame. And after my recent conversation with him about a week ago at this point, or somewhat time last week, still felt good about Notre Dame. But the last week or so, Shaun, Washington has been making a very strong push back here. So I think that this is a battle going forward. There's people on Washington's side, both media and just source perspective. I feel great about their chances. There are people on Notre Dame's side, media and others alike, that feel great about their chances. I do think that is going to be the battle down the stretch. Notre Dame is going to have to beat out Washington for Dylan Robinson. They can certainly do it, but this one is absolutely going to be a battle. This isn't a Notre Dame runaway like I once thought it could be. Washington is doing everything that they can do to make this one very interesting.
It's hilarious because starting off early 2024, we thought Derek Meadows would be the Notre Dame-Washington battle, right? And then that shifted. Now it's Dylan Robinson. I agree with you, though. And Washington is known for getting West Coast wide receivers and really good ones. It's not shocking that they come into the fray. They have a great new head coach, great offensive line. I'm sure he's selling the offense and selling Dylan Robinson that he can come in and be one of the top receivers going in college football. So I'm actually still optimistic, Double R. I really am. I expect for players like this, I expect late buzz to come from other schools. So we saw late buzz coming from a young man that just initially chose Notre Dame on July the 5th. We heard buzz coming from Ann Arbor that, man, we did a great job. We might have a chance to flip him, and then Notre Dame ends up landing his commitment. So we'll see. It's up to the staff to see if they can close the deal on the young man. But I feel cautiously optimistic. If I could put it at 4.5, 5 right now, I really would. It's a 50-50 battle, which at this point, you have to feel good about that.
Yeah, I really do think that Notre Dame certainly has a good chance here, Shaun. But I'll hats off to Washington. First and foremost, I'll say that the new staff up there with Jed Fish, I think that they have recovered well, because this is my vantage point of this one. This was Washington, UCLA, Notre Dame all involved. And then I think the official visit happened, or Notre Dame started kind of pulling ahead a little bit. The official visit happened. I think Notre Dame was the clear favorite coming out of the official visit. But the last couple weeks, again, Washington is kind of just steadily been persistent, been consistent. And they are a school that obviously he's a little bit more familiar with than Notre Dame. So we know a date, though, which is important. We know what this will end. July 18th is the commitment date that Dylan Robinson has scheduled with. Again, I believe that there are still some final conversations happening about what that last designation is. I do not think that Dylan knows 100% today where he is going to go. That's why it's going to be important for Notre Dame, Washington to fight down the stretch respectively. UCLA, again, is still in the fold, but I think they are number 3. They're running third, in my opinion, for Dylan Robinson as of today. Last guy, Shaun.
Do you think the Tanuk decision is something Dylan Robinson is going to be watching?
Not really. That's a great question. Not really. Because right now, Notre Dame only has 2 receivers in the class. And if Tanuk picks Notre Dame, then Dylan would be number 4 if he also wanted to come to Notre Dame. I think if there was a third wide receiver in the class right now and they were potentially going to go to 5, but there's a possibility that they stay at 4, I think that would potentially change his decision, or not change his decision, but alter his thought process a little bit necessarily. But I don't think that that's necessarily a wait and see on Tanuk type of thing. I think that this is just simply Dylan trying to find what's the best fit for him, because Shaun, we talked about it, man. The pitches are so different. They're very different. One school wants him as just a defensive back. One school wants him as just a wide receiver. One school wants him as a defensive back, but will also give him an opportunity at receiver potentially, depending how things shake out. So very, very different pitches for a guy like a Dylan Robinson. So I think it's just sorting through that. Last guy, Derek Meadows, 2025, Las Vegas, Nevada, Bishop Gorman. We have known his name for a very long time. It wasn't this past Irish Invasion. Was the one last year where Derek had earned his scholarship offer by the University of Notre Dame. At the point, Shaun, very small offer list. And for a long time, it stayed small. Notre Dame, Washington, like you said before, they were the running favorites for Derek. And then once Kalen DeBoer left for Alabama, it just kind of seemed like it was Notre Dame's to lose. But then, lo and behold, he went down to battle Miami. Here comes Bama. Here comes LSU. Here comes Tennessee. Here comes several others. Michigan threw their hat in the ring at that point as well. So, yes, a lot more attention on Derek Meadows. Now, I have been fully honest on this one, Shaun. This is how I think that this one has played out. I think that the SEC schools were trending in a higher direction than Notre Dame going into official visits. I think Notre Dame did a great job on the official visit, though. I think that they leveled the playing field. But I still believe that there's some hesitation on the Meadows side for Notre Dame. I think there is still hesitation. Notre Dame has a chance. Absolutely. They have a chance. But I still do believe that if he had to pick, I think it would be an SEC school. I think it would be Alabama. I still wholeheartedly believe that. But regardless, we've heard September 1st as a potential commitment date for Derek Meadows. It still seems kind of up in the air a little bit. This one, Shaun, might actually play out better for Notre Dame the longer it plays out. Because like I said before, if you're not the foregone leader, letting things kind of play out a little bit, maybe Alabama gets a wide receiver or two in the class, maybe LSU gets a wide receiver in the class. Now numbers start getting crunched a little bit more. This one actually might help if a place like Alabama does fill up a little bit compared to where Notre Dame is right now.
Benefit of Derek Meadows possibly being 1B, what we talked about. Remember the tiers, right? Because a lot of people, they love the upside, but they haven't seen the production. Right? So on boards all across the nation, he might be in that third, fourth wide receiver, on a board. And you're trying to land those top two guys to solidify the class, and he's an in-between guy. So it's something that benefits Notre Dame if it does play out, like you said, because now they can continue to work on them. I worry about other teams closer in the West coming in if the production jumps. Like if someone come in with a big NI deal that wasn't in the top three, maybe late in the game, that's something you have to worry about as far as them playing it into the fall. But as of right now, they made the move that they had to make. That's something that we'll talk about at the end. Notre Dame making the necessary moves that they have to make outside of closing. We've seen that. And so with Derek Meadows, now it comes down to relationship and being able to close the deal.
Yeah, so it's going to be really interesting to see the Meadows thing because, again, I truly believe that Notre Dame has done pretty much everything they can do in the Derek Meadows recruitment. I just think that the added layer of the SEC schools coming in has just kind of made things a lot cloudier, man. Like this wasn't a 1 versus 2 conversation like it once was. I mean, let's call it what it is. We're Notre Dame fans. Everybody out there is Notre Dame fans. So like we all personally see the Notre Dame pitch a lot clearer than just fans of other schools and maybe even some national perspective, right? You can see the long-term implications. You can see Mike Denbrock coming in and changing the culture offensively at Notre Dame. You can see the vision long-term. But Kalen DeBoer's vision's already, it's there. I mean, he's been doing this thing, and he just had 3 wide receivers drafted very highly in the NFL draft, 1 in the top 10. I mean, it's just a clearer vision is kind of for a short-term payback, if that makes sense. I'm not saying payback NIL. I'm saying if Derek Meadows goes to Alabama, let's say, hypothetically, playing for Kalen DeBoer, playing for the wide receiver coach, Jamarcus Shepard, and what he just did with the wide receivers at Washington, like that is a clearer path to the NFL. I mean, just call it what it is. It is a clearer path. Now, that doesn't mean that they'll win it out because I do think Notre Dame has cut the gap. Like I said, I still would not necessarily pick him to Notre Dame today, but Notre Dame has done a great job of fighting back against that outside pressure. There's no doubt. I just want to see how long this thing lasts because I think that can determine it big time how this one ends. Now, Shaun, let's talk about wide receiver recruiting from 2 vantage points, okay? 1, the positive aspect, and then 2, the skepticism, okay? Positive. Let's start here. If Mike Brown comes in, Shaun, and he gets 2 out of 3 of these receivers, let's say he gets Tanuk and Derek Meadows, or he gets Tanuk and Dylan Robinson, or he gets Dylan Robinson and Derek Meadows, whatever combination you want out of those 3, that would be a statement. That would be a big statement because we know, at least I think, that Mike Brown's a great developer. Their proof is on the table as far as what he did at the University of Cincinnati. I think that he is a really, really good developer of talents. He has never, though, recruited at this high of a level. he's been recruiting kids to Cincinnati, to Wisconsin. Like they just a slightly different change as far as not the prestige, that's not the right word, but like the level of recruit that you are trying to get to come to the University of Notre Dame to take that next step. So this would be a big statement, Shaun, if he's able to go there and say, I can recruit with the big boys. I'm getting 2 of my 3 top targets left on the board. I'm getting 2 high upside kids, depending on what 2 he gets. I think Mike Brown has a chance to make a big statement.
Not on top of that, I want to talk about what's really at the peak of this. I think what changes the dynamic is you just talked about Kalen DeBoer, who's one of the best play callers in all of college football. But then you have to talk about now Mike Denbrock changes the game for Notre Dame, right? So it's not just Mike Brown trying to close the deal. It's Mike Denbrock. It's Gino Guidugli. Notre Dame is taking the collaborative effort. Unofficial, official visits, contacts. That's the way they're going at the top talented kids. And so when you think about that, you think about Notre Dame having a greater chance than they've had in the past. And that is going to be the key because, like you said, Washington just put 3 wide receivers in the NFL. You can't counter that. You can't counter that. So what do? You point to your strengths. You point to the wide receivers that your OC just put into the NFL to counter that, right? You can't go to Notre Dame history. You go to your OC in collaboration with the wide receiver coach. And that's what you sell to Derek Meadows right now, on top of the fact that we were on you first. We've been loving you the most for the longest. Yo, we've shown that loyalty.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a great point. And we even heard that when Tanuk came, Shaun, that he was showing him film of Will Fuller when he was at Notre Dame with Will, and was like, dude, you remind me a lot of Will Fuller, like the speed that you bring to the table, the size, and a lot of similarities in that realm, right? So Mike Brown has a chance, and this offensive coaching staff has a chance, because Mike Denbrock's included in this, by the way. Let's not just skate over Mike Denbrock. Mike Denbrock, to your point, Shaun, he has had to have a big sell to these wide receivers because there isn't a recent track record of great wide receiver success at Notre Dame. There just hasn't been. Like, you've had guys in the past, but last 4 or 5 years, like, you just haven't had that to the degree that you need. So having that track record that Mike Denbrock brings, having just coached Brian Thomas Jr., Malik Neighbors, Kyron Lacey, and Will Fuller in the past at Notre Dame, and Alec Pierce and Tyler Scott, and he needs those names on his resume to showcase that's what we're doing now. That's where we're going. This is what we plan to do. So I think that is all on the table. And I mean, he has a chance to really just announce his presence, which I think big. Now, Shaun, the pessimistic view, because we have to give you both vantage points. I can't just say like, oh, everything's going to be great. We're all going to keep moving forward. It's going to be fantastic. We're going to get every target that's on the board. There is a chance. And yes, Marcus Freeman's always involved, Brandon. Trust me. Marcus Freeman's always involved, sir. Tanuk, I've heard Tanuk has talked to me about Marcus Freeman a lot in the past. So yes, Marcus Freeman is definitely involved. Shaun, the pessimistic view. Because look, Notre Dame could get 2 out of 3 of these kids. I think that's very possible. I mean, there's a small chance, but there's at least a little bit of chance that you could get all 3. I mean, it's out there. I don't think it's likely necessarily, but I mean, at least it's on the table. But there's a pessimistic view, Shaun. There is a possibility that Notre Dame only gets 1 out of 3. And there is another possibility that you completely strike out. I mean, let's call it what it is. I mean, look, I'll say it like this. Dylan Robinson, you are battling. It's probably a 50-50 chance right now versus you in Washington, right? So that could easily go to Washington. Derek Meadows can easily go to Bama. Easily. And that brings down to Tanuk, who is, again, getting pressure. Like, there is a chance that you go 1 out of 3 or 0 for 3, Shaun. And if that happens, sir, that's a disaster, Shaun. I mean, I don't know what else to call it, man. That would be an absolute disaster if you go 1 for 3 or you go 0 for 3. Would be a disaster.
We're not going to put that into the atmosphere, Double R. We're not going to do that. Not in this final show.
It's there, man. It's there. We can't pretend like there's no possibility that happens, man. It's out there.
I'm feeling good about 2 or 3. I really am. I think they're going to hit 67%. That's Hall of Fame. That's Hall of Fame, baby.
If you get 2 out of 3, then I feel great about I feel very good about Notre Dame's recruiting class. If you go 3 out of 3, I feel great. If you go 1 out of 3, it's not great, but I do think that Notre Dame could pivot and find somebody else if they wanted. I do think that that's a possibility. If it's 0 for 3, then man, good luck. Good luck. Because then, Shaun, what happens if they go 1 for 3 or 0 for 3? Where's my mind going to go? Ask me where my mind's going to go. My mind is going to go, why didn't you try harder for John Anthony Hall? Like, why didn't you push? Why didn't you push for John Anthony Hall? Why, as a staff, and again, this is Chancey Stuckey is a big fault in this, but you cooled on Cooper Perry, you cooled on Dalen McCutcheon, you cooled on a few guys that you were in a good spot with previously, right? So, yes, it is pessimistic. I do think it's more than look. I think that Notre Dame. I don't want to guarantee. Guarantee is a bad word. I think it's a high likelihood that you get 1 out of 3. I think there's a good, solid to good likelihood you get 2 out of 3. I think there's probably zero chance, not zero. There's a very small chance that you get 3 out of 3, Shaun. But I would say, I think it's more likely. You respond to this because I know you said you feel good about 2 out of 3. I actually think, though, that there's more likelihood that Notre Dame gets 1 out of 3 than they get 2 out of 3.
I can go with that. I can go with that because I think, I would go 4.5 out of 10, probably to get 2 out of 3, and then 1 out of 3, I would probably go around 7.5, 8. 0 out of 3, I would go, there's no change. I just don't see it. I know it's something that's out there, but I just don't see them striking out. I don't. I really do think these guys will be watching. I think if for some reason Tanuk goes elsewhere, I think Dylan Robinson is going to be like, I'm the best in the class if I go to Notre Dame.
Yeah.
Yo, I can be the dude if I go to Notre Dame.
It's
so
possible.
I mean, so that might intensify them going after him.
Shaun, someone asked on the board. I'm sorry to cut you off, but this is a continuation of this conversation. Someone asked what the contingency plan at wide receiver would be if they do strike out or they only get 1 out of 3. And Shaun, I know that is very pessimistic, but also I understand why they're asking it. I do. I mean, maybe I'm a little too close to this, man. And maybe I have my pessimistic hat on today. I don't know what it is, which is kind of funny because I'm actually not wearing a hat today. But there's something about me, man, that is just pessimistic about wide receiver recruiting today. It could change tomorrow. I could have another conversation with Dylan, start feeling great again, and we're okay. And Tanuk, kind of finalizes a new commitment date, and you feel good. And all those things could happen that could change that feeling quickly. But right now, man, my thought next is, what do they do next if they only get 1 out of 3 or they get 0 out of 3? What are they going to do next? Do you circle back to John Anthony Hall that you already basically told wasn't a take for you, that wasn't a guy that you wanted? Do you evaluate into the season? I don't know what's next after that, man. That would be a rough outing.
The only thing you have is go produce.
Yeah.
Now your guys that you got in the freshman and sophomore class have to step up and produce. That's going to make the impact on the 26th class, right? Because like you said, Mike Brown came into a very difficult situation. And I don't think he can avoid responsibility, but I don't think anybody would come down too hard based upon the fact that you and I know there is a framework there of things that we have not seen in the wide receiver room from a recruiting standpoint. That I think the points to Mike Brown and also Mike Denbrock from an evaluation standpoint. That's very important to point out. And then if we look at the board for the 26th class and how we think it's going to be, and the elite kids they're going to go out and stay on, I think it shows us the direction they want to go. So if they do get 1 out of 3, let's just say they get 1 out of 3, you're banking on impact from at least 2 freshmen. You have sophomores that are ready to take off in Greathouse and Faison. And then you have veterans via the portal, right? So now this is where Notre Dame fans can kind of soften the blow. If if the receivers come out as a wide receiver room and put up, let's say 3,000 yards in receiving yards.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, at least we know we have a guy that can develop, post a position, and get us to the point to produce. I'm very interested though as well. Like, if I'm pointing out this quarterback room to all these wide receivers, like, look, you see this wide receiver room we have and what's coming? Like, that's what you want to have. Like, excuse me, Jalen Milroe ain't it. And he might not be there next year, but I mean, now you're breaking in a new quarterback when you get to Alabama, Derek Meadows. You come here, you have 2 or 3 guys that can start right now. They just happen to be behind Riley Leonard. So Notre Dame has some strengths, Double R. I think in the past, Notre Dame didn't have strengths they could go to in these type of battles. Now I think they have some strengths that they can go to and really show these kids to say, look, we know how people are negatively recruiting against us, but this is what we have to counterpunch that. And I think they have that with all 3 of these candidates that we've talked about today. They have a fighter's chance. Is that what they call it? A puncher's chance?
It's a puncher's chance, man.
They have a puncher's chance in all of these battles.
Yeah, and they're going to need it. They're going to need it. Shaun, a lot of schools could say, we'll figure it out during the season. I don't know if it's because Notre Dame just handles recruitment so early, but I don't know, man. I just have a hard time seeing Notre Dame going that route, but I hope that I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong about that, but we shall see. Shall see. Wide receiver recruiting, though, folks. There it is. Again, still feel pretty solid about where you are with Tanuk Hines. Work to be done. Commitment date has been pushed back. Looks like it's Monday, the 15th. So, unfortunately, it's my first day at the new job. So, I will not be with you all for the Tanuk Hines decision if that goes in Notre Dame's favor. Okay. I will not be with you for the Tanuk Hines decision, unfortunately. But that one obviously is on the table. We also have Derek Meadows, which I think time is your best ally currently. And Dylan Robinson, you're in a battle with Washington. So there you are. And this wide receiver class can go in a lot of different directions, a whole lot of different directions. So wide receiver recruiting, we're going to get to linebacker recruiting next because, guys, trust me, that's a much more positive conversation, okay? A much more positive conversation. Before we do, hit that like button. Make sure you are subscribed to the podcast and hit the notification bell on YouTube. If you're listening to us on Apple, Spotify, or anything else in between, make sure 5-star reviews and you're subscribed over there. boards.irishbreakdown.com. Even after I leave, there's going to continue to be great recruiting intel on the message board. Brian, as always, is going to put some great team intel as we get closer and closer to the season beginning. I think we're only 50-something days out here, Shaun. So it's going to be coming very, very quick. And I'm not going anywhere. Just for people that don't know, I will be still doing some post-game shows in the fall here with the fellas. Still be coming on time to time when the schedule does permit. So not necessarily my last time on Irish Breakdown, but it will be my last recruiting hour show as the director of recruiting at irishbreakdown.com. But we're going to talk linebacker recruiting next here on the Notre Dame Recruiting Hour on the Irish Breakdown podcast. Shaun, like I said, I think that linebacker recruiting is in a much better place than where I actually see wide receiver recruiting right now. So, first and foremost, Shaun, you know what I think it is? I think it's the baseline of the class to start the conversation out with. Like, people know how I feel about Elijah Burris. Yeah, whatever. Ryan doesn't like him that much. Cool. People know how I feel about Jerome Bettis Jr. He's a legacy. He's fine. Whatever. Cool. But you also know that I like Anthony Sacca a lot at the linebacker position committed to Notre Dame in 2025 class. I also believe that Josiah Kia, the younger brother Kanu Kia, brings a lot of nice traits to the table that will have a great time developing. So I think that 2-man linebacker class gives me a higher baseline first and foremost compared to the wide receiver class right now. I like the linebacker class, Shaun. I know that we've talked about Anthony Sacca a bunch in the past. I know you're a fan of him, Josiah Kia. Like, I don't know, Shaun, am I crazy? Like, I think that linebacker recruiting, just first and foremost, even outside of the remaining targets on the board, I feel a lot more comfortable with the baseline of linebacker recruiting is right now for Notre Dame.
You know what? I've just always kind of fallen in love with the trajectory of guys that play a lot of third level in high school, see the field from the safety position, a la Brian Urlacher, and then make the transition as they grow into their body. So that's why I fell in love with Anthony Sacca and his overall athletic talent. I love that trajectory for linebackers. And you talk about the 2 kids they already have in the class. Those are kids that will probably be top 2 in any other class in the nation if they're committed
good.
elsewhere. You could say that. It's debatable. And now, what they have left, you have to be excited. Because if they can come up with a 4-man class that we think they can come up with and close, now it's a totally different narrative than a wide receiver.
Man, Shaun, someone just said that you look like a Sith Lord right now, and I just can't stop laughing in the back of my mind. I'm sorry. You got to get your lightsaber, man. Get your lightsaber. Get your red lightsaber. That's hilarious. Also, I know people are just having a general conversation in the chat about Bama quarterback room for some reason. I believe Eli Holstein is actually at Pittsburgh now, though, Archer. I believe I saw that this offseason, and he's at Pittsburgh now, I believe. But yes, the baseline of linebacker recruiting, getting back to the Notre Dame conversation. Anthony Sacca, like you said, Shaun, he's spent a lot of time at safety during the course of his St. Joseph prep career in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I believe that you saw his body transitioning as a junior. Now he's playing a lot more on the second level at 6'3", 225 plus pounds. He moves very well. He has instincts on the second level. It makes sense that his dad was a former quarterback. I think that he's got good eye discipline, all those types of things. Josiah Kia, 6'2", 210, 215 pounds, rushes off the edge a lot, out of the state of Hawaii, moves around the space a ton. I think that he is also a guy that has a lot of developmental potential. But let's talk about the last two, because there's only 2 guys left on the board for Notre Dame at linebacker, okay? There's only 2 at linebacker, and we're going to get into them heavily here. Right. And yeah, Shaun, do what you got to do, my friend. Do what you got to do. Yeah, so 2 linebackers that are on the board, okay? And then we'll get Shaun back on here in a second. Had to take care of some business. Let's start with Madden Farao, who is 2025 linebacker out of San Juan Capistrano, California, J. Sarah Catholic. Listed 6'3", 230 pounds. His coach actually told me he's up to about like 235, 240 this offseason. So he's a big young man. A lot of parallels to Kingston Viliamu-Asa. I always hesitate with saying that because Kingston was just such a unique person, just from what he believes in perspective, from a spirituality perspective. Like, not a lot of people are wired the way that Kingston Viliamu-Asa was. But I do think there are some direct parallels that you can find between them, not only just from, family upbringing to playing in California to spirituality, but there's just a lot of mannerisms that they kind of carry themselves. They're very soft-spoken, really intelligent young men as well. And I think there's just a lot of those things that they bring to the table that I just find eerily similar. Now, the Madden Farao thing has been extremely interesting, just talking about his maturation as a person, as a football player, but then as a recruit, because for a while, I thought that Notre Dame was in an okay spot with Madden Farao, but I didn't think that I didn't think that Notre Dame was a leader for a long time. And then he comes out with his top 4 schools, and Notre Dame is included in that. And then you start hearing kind of more conversation on the Notre Dame side of things, where they feel they were in a good spot for a long time about Madden Farao. And I found that very interesting. And then he went on his second visit to Notre Dame, his unofficial, earlier this offseason, and everything went great. And at that point, you started feeling Notre Dame is trending in a very positive direction with Madden Farao. And then he went on his official visit. And to be honest with y'all, 100% transparency on my last show here, I thought Notre Dame had kind of just locked it up. Now, he had not silently committed or any of that type of stuff, but you just felt coming out of that visit that Notre Dame was easily the top option for Madden Farao. So much so that he canceled his visit to Ohio State the week after. The next weekend, I thought he was going to cancel Texas, but he ends up going to Texas. Now, this one's been a little weird because honestly, I expected there to be a little bit more of a defined timeline at this point. Now, by all indication, he's still going to make a decision this summer. But I would have thought coming out of Notre Dame, or at least coming out of Texas, that we would hear pretty soon after a commitment date that's going to be in the works. That being said, Texas does seem to be the that second team for Madden Farao today. I do believe, just full transparency again, that Notre Dame is the pretty clear leader. I think that Texas did a great job on their official visit, and I think they're giving him a lot to think about today or moving forward. But I do believe that Notre Dame is still the team to beat firmly for Madden Farao. He matches, or they match, pretty much everything that that young man is looking for. He's looking for that spirituality aspect. He's looking for great relationships. He's looking for a thoughtful staff. He's looking for familiarity. And I think that seeing what he saw on his last couple visits, I think that Notre Dame has made him feel like it is home. I do think they've made it feel like that. All that is to say is that if it ends anytime soon over the next few weeks, barring something unforeseen, I believe that Notre Dame is the clear leader. And I think that they have a chance to solidify that down the stretch. Texas has made it a valiant effort down the stretch, and his official visit, I think, really did well with Madden. But I think that I feel good, very good about where Notre Dame is with that one. I think that he's in very good spots. Another interesting note, Archer had mentioned that Madden became Texas's top target after they missed out on Riley Pettijohn. And yes, that certainly adds to the push from Texas. There's no doubt about it. But regardless of that push, I do think Notre Dame is the team to beat for Madden Farao, star linebacker out of California. Now, the other guy, and this one that Notre Dame fans love to talk about, and trust me, I get it. I like to talk about him a lot as well. 2025 Bradenton, Florida, IMG Academy star Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng. Now, if you are new to this show, you may not know that he's Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah's younger brother, but if you're a regular, which most of you people are on this chat, you know that he is Jock's little brother, which obviously gives you the legacy aspect of everything that gives Notre Dame that gave Notre Dame a great footing early on, because Notre Dame actually started recruiting Nathaniel before he was at IMG as a junior. He was at DeMatha Catholic in the state of Maryland his first 2 years, freshman and sophomore year. They started recruiting him heavily when he was a sophomore in high school, and they've continued that conversation throughout. Now, very interesting timeline in the sense of before this unofficial visit to Notre Dame earlier this offseason, Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng had never been to South Bend. He took his unofficial visit to South Bend, to Notre Dame, and I think at that point, you really started to gain he really started to gain an understanding of just how special of a place Notre Dame is and how he could fit. Because hearing it from your brother about his experiences, what he did at Notre Dame, what he accomplished, all his friends, his major, all that type of stuff, that's all well and good, and that's great. But there was still that moment where you need to be able to visualize yourself at a place. And I think that unofficial visit to Notre Dame was the first time that happened. Before that, I think there was a massive cluster of schools, because this offseason has been about Nathaniel still had to go to a lot of places early in this offseason, Notre Dame included. This was an exploration process for him. He wanted to go to every place. He wanted to see everything. He wanted to experience everything because he had not experienced that before. Now, it was such a good visit, and the process started moving a little bit faster, that originally Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng wanted to take his official visit to Notre Dame sometime during the season, and he was going to take a couple official visits at that point during his senior year. He decided he wanted to move that one up, and he came to Notre Dame in June on an official visit, second time to campus. And for the first time in the history of Notre Dame, Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng and Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah were on campus at the same exact time. And guys, I think that one really, really moved the needle. One, brother, perspective on campus, getting your family there. I think that stuff is all beneficial for a person, a player, a recruit like Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng. But outside of that, you saw guys like Jalen Smith on campus. This gave him an opportunity to sit down with coaches more thoroughly. This had a chance to talk about scheme, talk about family, talk about that alumni network, everything involved. Everything kind of just really spoke to him during that official visit. And coming out of it, I felt Notre Dame had a lead. Now, I will say this, though. Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng is a guy that is not hard to read. That's not the right word. But he is a person that, and this is, I have no issue with this because for people that follow me on Twitter, I'm a big brand guy as well. Like individual brand, I think is very, very, very important, especially in the era of NIL. Like I want these guys to be able to put their name out there and get as much engagement as possible because it matters, whether you hate it, love it, or anything in between. Nathaniel, after every visit, every school, he is a very engaging person on social medias, Instagram, Twitter. He puts his stuff out there. Him in the different schools' uniforms and engaging with fans, and that is great. No shame at all on it. I would be the same way in this era of college football, the same exact way. But that does make it hard to read in the sense of a lot of great things to say about Notre Dame. A lot of great things to say about USC, a lot of great things to say about Michigan, Ohio State, all of them. He said a lot of great things. When you talk to him, though, there's just a feeling you kind of get when you bring up Notre Dame. There's just a feeling. Family. That's family. That's what he says all the time about Notre Dame. And you can tell when you see him, right? When he does an interview on video, because I've only had the fortune of talking to him on the phone. So I'm not able to see what his body language is like, how he reacts to certain questions, just that general sense. But when you do see it, when you do see him interview with guys on video, his eyes kind of light up a little bit, right? He kind of gets a little taller. There's just something about him that just kind of speaks differently when he talks about Notre Dame. Okay. So today, I still feel good about Notre Dame. I do. I said a 6 a couple weeks ago. It continues to kind of grow. I would say I'm about a 7 on Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng. I think that they are going to have a very good chance to close on him. Michigan is obviously a threat. I would say Michigan's probably the one that I think is the biggest threat right now. But USC has done a good job. Ohio State's done a good job. I know Ohio State just got Riley Pettijohn, so I don't know what the capacity of their linebacker room is looking at right now. But a lot of great schools that are coming after Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng. I do think Notre Dame could win this one. There's no doubt about it. Notre Dame is the team to beat today. Now, saying a team is the team to beat doesn't always mean substantial lead, right? Like there are some players that you look at and say like, oh, Notre Dame's the team to beat. And you know what that means. I'll use Jadon Blair now that he's committed to Notre Dame. Me saying Jadon Blair, me saying Notre Dame is the team to beat for Jadon Blair, guys. Notre Dame was the landslide winner. Like landslide. Notre Dame was the team to beat to the oomph degree. Like they were here, if you're watching me on video, and the rest of the teams were just kind of a couple tiers down. That's really what it ended up being. Yes, Penn State did a good job. Yes, Michigan did a good job, but Notre Dame was the team. Everyone knew that. But for some other players, and I think Nathaniel was included in this one, me saying I think Notre Dame is the team to beat is me saying that I think they've separated themselves to the top, but that separation might not be as big as others. So you're going to have to work. This one's not going to be an easy one down the stretch. We need to find out exactly what the timeline is. He talked about sometime during the season. Yeah, originally it was sometime in the fall or National Signing Day. I do think that has been moved up. I wouldn't be surprised if it happens sometime in the summer. If it happens sometimes in the summer, I think it's Notre Dame's to lose. Just do. I think Notre Dame's to lose. They have to keep doing what they're doing down the stretch. They have to keep selling it and they have to close. But I do think Notre Dame has done a tremendous job of solidifying what could be a great class. I think that they are in that level right now. They're on that trend. So I want to talk about this. I was hoping Shaun would be back by now because I would like to talk about this with someone else, but I can certainly do it by myself because I don't know if you guys have noticed, and you can ask my wife if you need some verification on this, but I can talk, right? I can talk. I talk a lot. Funny enough, my mother-in-law believes that I talk for a living. That's all she thinks I do. I don't write articles. I don't talk to people. I don't engage. I Don't do anything else. I just talk. That's all I do is I just talk for a living. So there you go. I want to talk about it this way. Notre Dame right now, in my opinion, is the leader for Madden Farao and Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng. If they solidify a class of Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng, Madden Farao, Anthony Sack, and Josiah Kia, what does that say about Max Bulla? What does that say? I thought long about this one, and I actually have an article I wrote about it that should be live on the site probably sometime today. The Max Bulla conversation, I wrote an article that was similar-ish to this a couple weeks ago, just talking about the job Max Bulla was doing. Max Bulla, before taking as the full-time, well, this M. Holcomb, this is assuming that he does close on. I said in the hypothetical situation where if you get all four of those kids, what does it say about Max? So, yes, this is assuming that they get those guys. That was the point. If they get that class, the four-man class, Max Bulla, who was a graduate assistant previously, graduate assistant at Alabama previously, and is in his first year as a full-time coach. Josiah Kia, all due respect, an easy pull for Notre Dame. Easy pull. Because Notre Dame, brother, same vision, like everything matched. Even though there were other, Texas offered Josiah Kia, Oregon offered to Josiah Kia, like they done a really, there were other suitors for Josiah Kia, but Josiah Kia was still a pretty easy pull comparative to some. Anthony Sacca was a good pull, really good pull. I think that one impressed me at the time, but I still had some questions about Max, not for anything that he had done, but for what he hasn't done. And that is close out a cycle as a full-time coach and solidify your class. We just haven't seen Max Bulla do that yet because he literally has never been asked to do that. That's not been part of his job description. Okay. Why is that creepy, IGK? I don't know what you're saying. Gosh, you guys are off the rails again. Tommy, you're about to get blocked. Max Bulla had not been asked to do that. If he is able to solidify that class, one, I think that Notre Dame had made just about the best decision that they could have when Chris O'Leary left. Because there was debate there, guys. There was. Do you get another safety coach? Do you elevate Max Bulla? What is the next step there? And they decided to do Max Bulla. And I think that has turned out in a fantastic way. And if he does that, I believe it says he's a rising star in the industry. He's got big time upside as a recruiter. It would tell me a lot. It would absolutely tell me a lot about where Notre Dame's linebacker recruiting and Max Bulla is. Because think about it this way. And I wanted to actually wanted to transition to a little bit of this because I had written an article and I have an article that's coming out about linebacker recruiting. The last 3 years, I'm starting since 2023. So it's 2023 class, 2024, 2025. The first 3 cycles under Marcus Freeman. Think about the linebacker recruiting that we have seen. I'm not even going to count 2022, even though Marcus Freeman, obviously, that is his class as well. I'm just going to talk about him as a head coach. 2023, you have Drake Bowen, Jay Nosberry, Preston Zinter. 2024, Kingston Viliamoasa, Bodie Cahoon, Teddy Rizak. You had a great linebacker coach and recruiter and defensive coordinator in Marcus Freeman. So you understand why linebacker recruits want to play for Marcus Freeman. It was very easy to see. Then you transition. Al Golden is the main linebacker recruiter. And if you remember the 2024 class, it was a little bit of a weird linebacker cycle because you had gotten Teddy Rizak at a strange time. Bodie Cahoon was a guy that I really liked and the staff really liked, but he was a little bit of a projection piece. And you really needed Kingston at the end to make that a really good class because that was the headliner. That was the elite player in the class. But Notre Dame went from Marcus Freeman to Al Golden and still figured it out. Then you transition to another guy that is the main linebacker recruiter, and that is Max Bullen now. So in 3 years, you kind of had 3 different headline guys doing the linebacker recruiting. Despite that, Max Bullen comes in and it's seamless. And it's not only seamless, he may have taken it up a notch, which is wild to say for a program that was in a great spot at linebacker recruiting. That 2025 class, if you're able to get Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng and Madden Farao, who, again, I think that Notre Dame has a great chance to get both kids at this point. There's a legitimate chance where you get a 4-man class that I think that he has said that he is that guy first and foremost. And we need to start talking. And I'll ask you guys in the chat, especially for people that have been following Notre Dame recruiting longer than I have, because again, I've been covering it a few years now at this point. But I paid attention to it growing up as far as the recruiting rankings and offers and commits and all that type of stuff. But I'm not a Notre Dame historian in the recruiting world. I just am not. If Notre Dame gets that 4-man class, that is the best linebacker class since ? I don't know the answer to that. I will say this, though. If that is the 4-man class they get, that is a better class in 2024. That's a better class than 2023. 2022? Probably, right? I mean, 2022 was what? Joshua Burnham, Nolan Ziegler, Junior Toilamaka, Jalen Sneed. I mean, I guess you could argue that one, but I would take this class over that one. Just in retrospect, I would. And there might be recency bias there. Be full transparent. There might be recency bias. But man, to think of that class and what you could be, because this is what a class like that does for you, okay? Think about it this way. We all hate the Viper talk for linebackers, right? Your guys like Junior Toilamaka enter the mind where you're just like, why is Junior Toilamaka playing Viper? And it's a great question. But if you get that 4-man class with being able, no one's sleeping on anybody, Les. I'm telling you what I believe right now. Okay. That's all. I think apparently Michigan beat writers are also saying that they think Notre Dame is the leader. So I don't pay attention to Ohio State beat writers because Archer, correct me if I'm wrong, but is Ohio State still pushing hard for Nathaniel? Because Pettijohn changes things a little bit, does he not? I mean, you correct me if I'm wrong about that one, but yeah, can only report what I know, though. Can only report what I know. If you're able to get that 4-man class, though, this allows you to get very versatile with how you're going to use these players. People are going to hate. See, Archer says you can sleep on OSU, so I'm assuming that Ohio State is not pushing as hard for Nathaniel anymore. Makes sense. I know people hate the Viper conversation. Okay. They hate the Viper conversation with linebackers moving there. But I'll tell you this, and I would love to hear people's responses in the chat because I know you guys get very spirited about this conversation. Okay. And I know a lot of you have seen tape of Madden Farao. I personally would not be mad if they moved Madden Farao to Viper at some point. Wouldn't be. 6'3", long, does a lot of it in high school right now, explosive off the edge. He's an actual potential Viper, in my opinion. He is not Junior Toilamaka, in my opinion, right? Junior Toilamaka was a guy that you forced into a role because you didn't have numbers. I don't think that you move Madden Farao because of numbers. I think you can move Madden Farao because he is a really good fit potentially at the Viper position. So, but you wouldn't be able to do that if you didn't have a 4-man class as good as that potentially is. Because Anthony Sacca is a athlete that Notre Dame has talked to him about playing Rover, obviously. But he's also a kid that I think can play Will. I wouldn't be shocked at all if Anthony Sacca eventually is a Mike linebacker in Notre Dame's defense. I wouldn't be shocked about it at all. Josiah Kia can play out in space. I think he can also move inside to play Will. And then you have Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng, who Notre Dame's talking about Rover as well. They're talking about Will, and they're also talking about him playing that money backer role in sub package. So you have so much versatility that I think that you can really mix and match. And Nathan hasn't been any recent success moving linebackers to Viper. I mean, it just started, right? I mean, like you're talking about a very small sample size. I mean, you're talking about Joshua Burnham, who's entering year 3, if you're making the transition in year 1 to being a defensive end, right? Being a Viper. Let's see what he looks like on the edge this year. Maybe he's a guy that pops. I think Junior Tolomaka was just a mistake, to be honest. I don't think that he's a kid that should be playing Viper. Unfortunately, he did it because it's better for the team. And I think Christopher Crosby, I agree with you 100%. I think it's very good, well stated. I just don't want to move him because you have to. That is 1,000,000%. I want to move a player because I can, because it makes sense, not because I have to. I believe that same thing with the portal conversations, okay? But 100%. I don't want to have to go. I don't want to have to go in the portal because I have to. I want to go in the portal because I want to. Very clear differences there. Now, unfortunately, in the transfer portal era, that's not how that always works. Like at wide receivers this year, you didn't go and get Chris Mitchell and Bo Collins and Jane Harrison because you wanted to. You went there because you had to because of the defections on the roster. But RJ Oben, for instance, you kind of did it just because you wanted to. You could have rolled into this year and you could have rolled into this year with Jordan Botelho, Joshua Burnham, and any of those couple guys, right? MB, there's an update on Ivan Taylor on the board, boards.com. You could have walked into that this year with those guys at Viper, and there's a chance that you would have been fine, that you actually would have been good at that position. But you looked at RJ Oben and said, that guy could help a defensive end room. So bring him in to play strong side and we'll figure it out, right? Like Bryce Young could have came in and been that guy, and you could have had a couple rotational dudes. Like you have enough talent in the room is my point, but they're too good. Big licks burner. Is their staff looking at Madden as a Viper though? I don't know. I mean, I've only heard linebacker, but were they looking at Junior Tolomaka as a Viper? Probably not. I mean, stuff happens though, right? Things happen because I'll give you an example, Big Licks Burner. It's a great question. It really is, okay? I don't think that Notre Dame recruited Joshua Burnham to be a defensive end or a Viper when they first came there. It was just that Joshua Burnham showed up and put on a substantial amount of weight where you're now like, okay, that's a Viper now, right? Like that's not a linebacker. Guys outgrow so fast, man. So fast. Bringing Shaun back in. Hey.
Has some administrative duties to take care of, my brother.
Woo, big time. Big balling, man. Big balling. So I was just talking about linebacker and just how if you're able to get Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng, you're able to get Madden Farao on top of Anthony Saka, on top of Josiah Kia, like that would be the best linebacker class since when, Shaun? I mean, honestly, like that would be a historical linebacker class for Notre Dame.
Oh, you're making me go back in my mental for this one. I would say probably early 90s, maybe early 90s.
Yeah, I was asking people in the chat, Shaun, because obviously I'm not a historian when it comes to recruiting, so I can only talk about what I know, right? But I was thinking like I would take it over 24. I would take it over 23. 2022 would be a conversation for me, but like before that, I can't remember a year where I was like, yeah, that linebacker class is better than this one. Someone said like early 2000s. I mean, like it's been a long time, man. It's been a really long time.
I'm looking it up. I think the Corey Minor class with Corey Minor was like viewed by some as the best player in the nation at linebacker. And eventually they played him at end in the 3-4. But
I forgot about Corey Minor.
Maybe that class. Yeah, maybe that class from a depth standpoint, maybe the Derek Curry class. I think that was like Curry, Holt, Hoyt, a few other kids, because they really invaded Texas They had some really good. They had some really good classes right after Luke, of course, because the new head coach came from Texas A&M.
Shaun, here's the last question, and we're going to get into our deeper conversation. Okay, our deeper conversation is coming, and it's a great one that I'm looking forward to talking. We're gonna relive some of my time at IB next, guys. We're gonna do that. But Shaun, if Max Spola is able to pull these last two of Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng and Madden Farao, forget about the historical context. What does that say about Max Spola and your confidence in Max Spola as a coach and a player and a recruiter? Uh-oh. We got some technical difficulties. I'm going to ask Shaun that next question, guys, because trust me, we have a deep conversation that's coming. I wanted to really talk about historical aspects of what Marcus Freeman's doing in the recruiting space. We're going to do that next here, though, folks. Before you do, please don't go anywhere because we're going to have a great conversation here, okay? Great conversation. Please hit that like button for me. Make sure you're subscribed to the podcast and hit that notification bell on YouTube. If you are listening to me on your favorite podcast platform, that could be Apple, Spotify, anything else, make sure you're subscribed and hit a 5-star review. It's my last episode, man. So you guys could just do me a solid. Just say, Ryan was awesome. Ryan's great. We'll miss Ryan. Please. I really hope you do that for me. Appreciate y'all. BorisIrishBreakdown.com for all the latest team and recruiting intel. The intel doesn't stop even when I leave. But I want to thank you all so much for tuning into this part of the Irish Breakdown podcast. But we'll be back next to talk big picture, Notre Dame, recruiting, Marcus Freeman, everything in between. Thanks for tuning in to the Notre Dame Recruiting Hour here on the Irish Breakdown podcast. So everyone, I have a article that's coming out soon. Okay. So this is a shout out to Brian Driscoll. Okay. Shout out to Brian Driscoll because he asked me to add this segment to the podcast today. And I decided to turn it not only into the podcast, but also into an article. So this article is going to be at irishbreakdown.com later today. I wanted to think back to my first day at IB, which was in January of 2022 officially. Okay. I technically been started working there already a couple weeks in advance, but I wanted to think back to the state of recruiting at that time, because if you remember, that's right after Brian Kelly left LSU. Marcus Freeman gets elevated to head coach. And quickly, we started getting signs of some things that Marcus Freeman was going to do differently. So I wanted to write an article and do this segment on a few changes that Marcus Freeman has made in the recruiting side that I believe were needed and I believe have really stood firm the test of what is going to matter most for Notre Dame recruiting. So I want to work through that list. And then the last section, because again, we can't just be sunshine and rainbows all the time. There is a big issue that I wanted to talk about at the end. And we'll have the conversation of hopefully Notre Dame changes this and hopefully Notre Dame improves upon this, but it's more wishful thinking, I guess, right? So let's start with, and I think that this is most important. This is because this is an ideology. This isn't a strategy thing. This isn't a let's attack this state more, let's attack that state more. This is more an ideology of what Marcus Freeman wanted to do the minute that he got to campus. Okay. And we actually started to see this when he was just a defensive coordinator, really kind of creating his defensive roster in his image. And this is parlayed into what we have seen on the roster, I believe, from a recruiting perspective in a lot of areas. There has been an emphasis, get longer, Get more athletic. Get longer, get more athletic. Why do we want to do those things? Always ask yourself this. When we hear about a ideology or a strategy, why does Notre Dame want to do that? Why does any team want to do that? Why does a coach want to do that? Why do you want to get longer and more athletic? Probably for most people, you're thinking, why wouldn't you? But you have to ask yourself, why is that the vision? Why was that the initiative? Because in this era of space, playing in space, tackling in space, making plays after the catch, throwing to space, I mean, all those things involved, covering out in space. You need long, athletic players because of why? Because the margin for error gets so much smaller. So much smaller. Windows close like that. Timing is become essential because everyone is so much longer and more explosive and more athletic than they once were. And in this world where you're defending against these spread offenses defensively, or you're offensively trying to create space against these more explosive second level defenders, you need to evaluate, create, and manipulate space. So Marcus Freeman from day one was like, I need to get longer. I need to get more explosive. I need to get more athletic. That length that we talk about too is also great for developing and transitioning. How is a guy as a 6'5", 265, 270 pound defensive end? Those guys have a upside developmentally to maybe eventually turn into a playmaking 3 technique, or a lightly built tackle develop into a guard, or a line or a defensive end to actually, I already said that one. Defensive end, defensive tackle, corner to safety. Developmentally, it gives you a different track, and that improves your overall team athleticism all over the place. And there has been so many examples of that throughout Marcus Freeman's tenure. We can obviously talk at linebacker because that's the easiest one, because that's the position he played, position he coached, and he was a defensive coordinator for Notre Dame in 2021. So you can talk about Drake Bowen. You could talk about Jaden Osbury. You could talk about Preston Zinter. You could talk about Bodie Cahoon. You could talk about Kingston Viliamoasi. You could talk about Teddy Rizak. You could talk about 2025 and the class that they have put together and continuing to put together with Anthony Sack and Josiah Key and potential of Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng and potential of Madden Farao. But also, you can even go back to the 2022 class. Jalen Sneed, Joshua Burnham, Nolan Ziegler, Junior Tuilamaka, and even the guys that don't end up panning out, you still took swings at guys that are longer and more athletic. And that was easy to see at linebacker very early on. You're like, wow, that linebacker class, it looks a little bit different than what Notre Dame's been getting. Because again, all due respect, and I truly mean that, because I know it can come off very negative sometimes. But Drew White, good player. J.D. Bertrand, very good linebacker. Jack Kaiser, rock solid, coming back in 2024. But the initiative is to be better than that, right? You're not recruiting to get J.D. Bertrand and Jack Kaiser every year. You're recruiting to get bigger, faster, stronger. Every single year. Every single year. You want to get better. It's like parenthood, right? You don't want your kids to have worse than what you had or the same as what you had. You want them to have better. So you shoot for better. And Notre Dame has been shooting for better. They have been. The athleticism. D-Troll, you're too funny, man. They have vines for arms, man. Vines for arms. Lake for days. His hands almost touch the floor. Those vines. There you go. You got it. You got it. But we can see it at linebacker very early on. The next initiative, which this is all about getting longer and more athletic. Cornerback. That was paramount for Notre Dame. Paramount. And obviously that goes to Mike Mickens and what he has established at corner. But also, what did Marcus Freeman have when he was at Cincinnati? He had long athletic corners. He had Ahmad Sauce Gardner. He had Kobe Bryant. He had some really good corners. And I think that is what he strived for. Benjamin Morrison, the transition from Cam Hart to wide receiver to corner and the ascension of that. Leonard Moore, Carson Hobbs, Dallas Golden, Mark Zachary, Cree Thomas. It's a lot of length, guys. A lot of length. That's a lot of big time corners, right? You got longer there. You got more athletic there. Safety. Don Schuler, Bronte Johnson, Jadon Blair. Like, you have gotten some length and athleticism at safety, which needs to continue to be bolstered moving forward. Defensive line wise, even though, and we'll talk about defensive line recruiting a little bit more in depth later, but despite the headache that it is sometimes, you have gotten a lot of guys that have high upside and length. Brennan Vernon, Armel Mukum, Christopher Burgess, Boubacar Traore. A lot of guys with Logan Thomas. Even though he's a lightly built guy, he's got very long arms and athleticism. That is for a reason. When that split, we've seen this. We have seen this. Think about Caleb Williams 2 years ago, not this past year. We kicked his butt 2 years ago. How many times did we have Caleb Williams dead to rights, and all of a sudden he breaks out of the pocket? We're just an arm, we're just an inch too short, arm length too short. Just aren't able to finish a play. Think about Alabama 2020. How many close plays there were? Because yes, we're going to always hyper focus on Najee Harris hurdling over Nick McLeod, or Devontae Smith making a play in space, or Mac Jones sidestepping out of a pressure and finishing a play. The difference there is you weren't long enough and you weren't athletic enough to finish those plays. You need to be better there. Because in all of those plays, Notre Dame wasn't in bad position for any one of them. Not one of them. Devonta Smith on his bubble screens. Sean Crawford's right there. He's right there. You, as a coach, you put him in the right spots. Unfortunately, he just wasn't the right athlete to be in that spot. It's different. Nick McLeod had Najee Harris. He's there. He's dead. Nick McLeod wasn't good enough to be in that spot. Wasn't a good enough player. I don't even know what defensive end missed Mac Jones on that stupid spin outs that finished their first down. That is the difference here. Because we're going to hyper focus and we're going to talk forever about quarterback play and offensive output. Sure, but there are still plays defensively that you weren't able to finish. Weren't able to finish the play. Offensively, it's the same thing, man. How many plays over the years has it just been like Notre Dame is a step short there? They didn't get to the hole quick enough. I know you guys are going to make a lot of jokes. Ha ha ha. That's what she said. Whatever. Cool. But the split second, that half a step, it makes a difference, man. It is super cliche to say football is a game of inches, but it is. It is. That's why on defense, you've gotten longer. That's why on offense, Charles Jagasaw, Owen Strebig, Gerby Lamberts, the tight ends you've gotten, Cooper Flanagan. Now you got James Flanagan. Wide receiver, Micah Gilbert, Cam Williams. You have tried to get more explosive, more athletic, and longer. The running backs you've gotten. That will matter in a game that is decided by the smallest of margins. They'll matter. And you'll notice it when it matters. You'll notice it. I promise. I promise. The Ohio State game. Stupid screen at the end that we hated, right? Should have gave Aldrich the ball. There's no doubt that you should have gave Aldrich the ball. But you know what? You were about an inch away from completing that pass and probably winning that football game. The screen that JT Tuilamolau knocked down. You complete that, you probably win the game. The inches won the game. Unfortunately, it wasn't on Notre Dame's side, though. It wasn't on Notre Dame's side. So we can joke about it. And I know it's in playful humor. And you know me, I'm a goofball. I can joke. I'm good with that. Sarcasm, I'm good with that. But in all seriousness for a second, that is going to be the differentiator between Notre Dame being a great team, being a good team, or being somewhere in between. or somewhere lower. Few missed interceptions too. Absolutely. Absolutely. It really does make a difference. It really does. Those couple key plays, a batted ball, missed window, fingertip, knocking down a pass, one half step too short on a rush around the arc. All those things really added up to losing games. Notre Dame needs more of that. And I think that has been a big initiative for Coach Marcus Freeman during his time at Notre Dame. You might disagree with some of the players they pushed with. You might disagree with cooling on a kid. You might disagree just with the strategy in general. But I think one common ground we can find is that they've never just tried Notre Dame's recruiting sucks for the last 36 years. Wow, that is a heck of a statement there. And that person's gone. That might be the last pancake you guys get for me in this chat, by the way. That might be it. Last time I blocked somebody. There we go. There we go. So that's one big thing that I think Marcus Freeman has changed drastically. Now let's talk about some of the areas that he has changed drastically as well. I want to talk about one that I think the one that made the most sense very quickly is the presence in Texas. I have said this stat a lot on this show, so I do not want to just kind of rehash it too much, okay? But Brian Kelly's last 5 recruiting classes, he had 3 players from the state of Texas in 5 years. Marcus Freeman in his first recruiting class in 2023 had 4 players from the state of Texas in 1 class. I don't know why, and I'm actually not throwing shade at Brian Kelly, because you guys know I have no problem throwing shade at Brian Kelly. Zero chance. Zero problem with that at all. But for whatever reason, Brian Kelly ignored Texas for the last few years of his tenure. Wasn't a place that he wanted to. And I think that is one of the most I just don't understand it. I just don't. Because if I asked you all, what are some of the best developers of talent from a state-to-state perspective, Texas would probably be number 1 by 90% of you. There'll be some Floridas thrown in there. There'll be some Californias, maybe a Georgia. Like there'll be some others, I'm sure. Not everybody. I don't think it'll be 100% hit rate on Texas being number 1, but the historical data, the names that you've come seeing out of the state of Texas, I mean, there is just so many great football players that come, and it's on a surplus too, guys. It's not like there's 30 good players out of state of Texas. Like there's some years where like the number 100th player in the country in the state of Texas is a dude, like a really good football player. You can find so much talent in the States. And again, for whatever reason, Notre Dame went away from that for a few years. You got 4 now in 2023. You got 3 in 2024 as well. And then 2025, you have an opportunity to only get 1. But if you look at 2026, I think that Notre Dame is going to really pick that back up in the Lone Star State. Like I think they're going to I think they already do have some big traction in the state of Texas. And I wouldn't be surprised if you see a 3 or a 4 commits total in the 2026 class from the state of Texas. And that's how it always should be. There's so much talent and there's a surplus of talent. Go find it. Not every player from the state of Texas is going to go be a Longhorn. Not every one of them is going to go to Texas A&M. Not everyone is going to go to TCU, whatever, like all the really good schools in Texas. Notre Dame needs to be able to go into Texas consistently and get good football players. And they have so far. I mean, your leading receiver in 2024, might be a guy from Texas. Your leading rusher, potentially. I mean, I'm more of a Jeremiah Love leading rusher guy, but Jadarian Price is from Texas. Leonard Moore has a chance to come in and play Kedron Young looks like the next stud at running back after Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price lead. Like, Texas should be huge for you if you're Notre Dame. Should be huge. It hasn't been for whatever reason the last few years. But it's changing. It's changing. The 2026 class, what I think will continue to be a step in the right direction. You have, and so here was the stat that if I remember correctly. So the last 10 years under Brian Kelly, the first 5 of that 10. So if we cut it into 2 segments, the first 5 years of his last 10, he had 7 players from the state of Texas. The last 5, only 3. Notre Dame, so that means 10 players in a 10-year span from the state of Texas. Okay. 10 players in 10 years from Texas. Notre Dame in 2 years to start Marcus Freeman's tenure had 7 in 2 years. They'll have 8 if they get to Tanuk Hines. And then I think of 2026, they'll be over that 10. So in a 4-year span, Notre Dame is going to do more in the state of Texas than what I think they did the previous 10 years under Brian Kelly. That's a stat, man. That is a stat. Again, I don't know why there was depreciated value in the state of Texas under Brian Kelly, but Marcus Freeman has certainly shown that he wants to get that back. Next one I want to talk about. There has to be, and because I'm not going to bore you with keep the good players home. That should be essential for every football team, right? Like the University of Texas should keep the best players in Texas at Texas. If that should be their goal. Notre Dame should keep the best player in Indiana and Illinois at home. That should be a goal. Sure. All those things should be true. Georgia should keep Georgia kids at home. That's their goal at hand. I shouldn't have to announce that. That should be a expected thing. One thing, though, that has been been a crux for Notre Dame is their continued presence in the Southeast was just not good enough. Just didn't get enough good players out Southeast. And it doesn't even come down to going into Southeast and getting some of the best players from the Catholic schools in the South. No, it is the ideology, and maybe this should have been the first point, but the ideology of what fits at Notre Dame, I think, has changed so drastically. So drastically. It's not anymore Catholic schools from this area. They are now dipping into the Southeast for kids that are from public schools, which is just not a traditional Notre Dame route. And this isn't even a Brian Kelly thing. This is like a pretty just recent history of Notre Dame. They just haven't dipped as much into this pipeline. But now when you look at the 2025 class, I want to use this class as an example. This is the best one because Notre Dame has done such a good job in the Southeast, even with the pending decommitment flip or whatever of Ivan Taylor. You still have a quarterback, Deuce Knight, who is a potential 5-star in the 2025 class out of George County in the state of Mississippi, a public school in Mississippi. Notre Dame, when Deuce Knight signs with Notre Dame, he would only be the second player from the state of Mississippi to sign with Notre Dame in 28 years. 28 years. And it's a public school kid from Mississippi. And Jeremiah, I agree completely. North Carolina is I know it's not the deep South, but so the Carolinas still South. I think that is included, obviously, in this conversation. I actually have that written down here. We'll get to that. Not only do you have Deuce Knight, though, Dallas Golden. Now, Dallas Golden goes to a school that you should tap into more. They should just do better in Berkeley Prep, just flat out. But you got Davion Dixon, who's now in a public school in Miami Palmetto. You have Justin Thurman in the class. You also just got, and because this is what I was just talking about to you, Jeremiah, you got Jadon Blair out of North Carolina, which, again, North Carolina's not the deep South, but it's still a spot that is traditionally SEC-oriented, right? At least ACC-oriented, but SEC, absolutely. You get Jadon Blair, 6'4", 190 pounds, 5-star upside safety out of North Carolina. You talk about what you did in the 2024 class out of North Carolina. Went down, you got Bryce Young, should have. Oh, is that what he meant? Oh, well, Notre Dame's doing pretty well without it, so we'll see. Gotcha. Thank you, though, Archer. I did misread that. I thought he was talking about North Carolina. Man, I'm talking about states and you're talking about national championships. We'll talk about both. We'll talk about both here. You also have Daniel Anderson out of Arkansas. You also have Jerome Bettis Jr. out of Georgia. But again, if we're talking about North Carolina, if I include this into the South conversation, Jadon Blair, obviously in this class, but 2024, you also got Jack Larson. You also got Micah Gilbert, Bryce Young. So you're tapping into the Carolinas a little bit more now as well. Big piece of the puzzle. Agreed, Jeremiah. I think we see that one very similarly. It's the same conversation, though. It all goes around the same conversation that I just had with Texas. Where did the best talent come out of? Texas, Southeast, right? Whether you want to say it's Florida, whether you want to say it's Georgia, Alabama, whatever, Southeast produces a lot of great football players. Notre Dame needs to tap into that pipeline more. They need to tap into that area more, and they are. 2025, I think, has been a big representation of that. Notre Dame needs to continue that. You need to go into 2026 and have the same type of impact that needs to happen. Yeah. David Sanders is good, by the way, Archer. He's good. I would like Notre Dame to get the number one player in North Carolina in 2026. I don't know if that's necessarily reasonable, but that would be my deeper wish for Notre Dame gain, for my own gain. Impact Southeast. Impact the Southeast. That is what I need Notre Dame to do. And then the other thing, before I get into the negative conversation, okay? it's a pretty negative conversation. Hopefully Shaun's back by then, because then we'll have a deeper conversation about that, because I know you want to talk about this one. Quarterback recruiting is the next one. Quarterback recruiting. Guys, you know that I'm a Notre Dame fan at heart, okay? And yes, I'm an analyst. Yes, I'm going to analyze fairly and not spin, but also I'm a fan, right? I'm a fan. And I have suffered the same ways you have suffered with quarterback play over the last several years. I've suffered. All due respect. I know, very negative, but it is what it is. Drew Pine wasn't good enough. That wasn't a good enough option to have in the quarterback room in case someone got hurt. Brandon Clark wasn't good enough. So many quarterbacks that I have watched come into a football game. All right, here. This is going to come off negative, but it's fine. Tommy Rees wasn't good enough. The options that you have had over the last X amount of years at Notre Dame have not been good enough. It should not have been, if Tyler Buchner isn't good or he's hurt, then you're up, you know what, creek. Like, it just should not have been to that point. And it was. It was. Notre Dame had done some good things in the 2010s at the quarterback position. You had talent there. The player Irish for life. I'm talking about the player. No. Yeah. No, I'm talking about Kendra Harrison, Archer. Yeah. No, not Faison Brandt. He's very good, but yeah, Notre Dame already has their quarterback. So yeah, Kendra Henderson is who I was talking about. Or Harrison. Kendra Harrison, not Henderson. Harrison. Very, very good football player. Quarterback has just been a spot that has just been so frustrating. Because, yes, there's been lack of development, but also, guys, there's been lack of good recruiting at quarterback for several years. There has been consistency, I should say. There was a time where Tyler Buchner gets hurt. You have Drew Pine and a freshman quarterback in Steve Angeli. That's your options. And that is an issue. That's a problem. Now I look at 2025. And again, this is 2023 class, 2024 class, 2025 class included. And you could throw 2026 in there as well. But I'm giving you the hypothetical of 2025 recruiting, the season. You could go into a season, potentially, not likely because, someone's going to transfer, all that type of stuff. We'll say that for a different conversation, though. You're going to look around in 2025. Yes, Brian, Drew Pine was never supposed to see the field, but he was the backup quarterback. That's the point. That was your only option after someone gets hurt. He was your only option. You could say, oh, he was only supposed to be the backup. He was still the backup. That's the point. Drew Pine level talent should never be the backup. That was the point. That's the point. Now I'm looking at 2025, and if everyone stays, and again, nobody will, not everyone will, but if they did, you're sitting around like 2025. If CJ Carr is a starting quarterback, you got Kenny Minchie over there. You might still have Steve Angeli. You got Deuce Knight over there. And then 2026, Noah Grubbs comes in. It's just a different world that we're living in at the quarterback position. This is not the same anymore, guys. Steve Angeli, well, actually, no, I'm not going to say Steve Angeli. Kenny Minchie, 3 years ago, is a giant in the quarterback room. A giant. He's 6'2", 215 pounds, where the heck he is now. It's a different world we're living in, man. It is a different world. Quarterback recruiting is different. Not everybody's going to pan out. But I'll say this. In the hypothetical 2026 season, where you have Noah Grubbs, Deuce Knight, CJ Carr, and Kenny Minchie still on the roster. Again, hypothetical, not all going to happen. But in that hypothetical world, you're looking around at nothing but talent. Which 6'4" guy, which 6'4" guy do I like the best? That's going to be the conversation we're going to have. I know. CJ is only 6'3" or whatever, but like, still 6'4" plus. Noah Grubbs is standing over there with a strong arm. Oh, there's a 6'5" quarterback from the state of Mississippi named Deuce Knight, who might be the best athlete we have ever had at the University of Notre Dame. Oh, there's CJ Carr, by the way, who might be the highest rated of them all. And we're not too far removed where Steve Angeli is one of your more talented quarterbacks on the roster. And if he stayed for 2025 or 2026, he's your least talented quarterback on the roster. Think about that. How far we have come in just a couple years, man. What is the most important position on the field in the game of football? It's quarterback. Here's another question. What is the most important position on the field in any sport? The answer is still quarterback. Yes, I talked about this already. There was deficiency on the roster when you're playing Alabama in 2020. There's no doubt. You had to be better at corner. You had to be better at safety. You had to be better finishers at defensive end. There were spots that you need to be better at. Wide receiver, you need to be better at. There's no doubt about that. But what is the elephant in the room? Was that quarterback wasn't good enough, man. It wasn't good enough. I'm tired, and this is fandom for a second. I'm tired of a quarterback being good enough to win 9 games. Oh, he's good enough to win 9 games with. Who cares? Who cares? Because you just put a cap on your ceiling. I want a kid that is good enough to win a championship. I want a kid that he wouldn't even dream of going 8-4, 9-3. Wouldn't even dream about it because he's that good, man. I want the difference. Different at the quarterback position is going to be one thing that separates this team from being a good program, a great program, and an elite championship level program. It's going to be the quarterback position. Yes, you need wide receivers. Yes, you need offensive play calling. Yes, you need all those things, guys, but you can't do it without the quarterback. Can't do it. Can't do it. You need it. You need it. Deuce Knight is different. Something that CJ is different. Maybe. I think CJ is very good. We'll see if he's different. I think Deuce is different, though. I do. I am excited to see how this quarterback room shakes out over the next few years. Because for the first time in a long time, from an entirety of a quarterback room, not one player, but an entirety of a quarterback room, I look at Notre Dame's quarterback future and I say, it's not going to be because of talent. But I could look at Drew Pine. Again, all due respect to Drew. I don't have any issue with Drew Pine. But I looked at a Drew Pine-led offense, and I knew that it could only get this good. That's it. That's a cap. There is a cap. We live too long as a Notre Dame fandom. We have been living way too long as a Notre Dame fan base with a cap on how good an offense could be, or a cap on how good a team could be. I'm tired of that, man. I'm tired. Quarterback position is maybe the number one thing that I look at the biggest difference in Marcus Freeman's tenure so far. Quarterback recruiting has been astronomically better. Like, it has been so much better. It's almost unbelievable because negativity, right? Negativity. The pessimism is in me. Pessimist in me, excuse me. There wasn't too long. Let me rephrase it. The pessimist in me, when they landed CJ Carr, was like, that's not supposed to happen. As a Notre Dame fan, I'm like, that's not supposed to happen. Then they landed Deuce Knight, a 6'5" kid with 4.5 speed, a 42-inch vert, and a howitzer for an arm. And I'm like, bro, Notre Dame doesn't get kids like that. That's not allowed, is it? That's got to be in the rule book somewhere. Like, there's no way that Notre Dame could get a kid like that. No chance. And they follow that up. And yes, there was a quarterback or two that I probably would have preferred in 2026, all due respect to Noah Grubbs, but Noah Grubbs is still very good. And you follow that up after those two, it's like, dang, dude, dang. I didn't know Notre Dame was allowed to do that. I didn't know they were allowed to stack good quarterbacks back to back to back. That's wild. Did not know that was allowed. It's pretty wild to think about, man. But apparently it's allowed. Apparently it is allowed. Apparently Notre Dame's allowed to get good quarterbacks every single year. Apparently. Who would have thought? For the longest time, I was like, oh man, I didn't think Notre Dame was allowed to recruit big time quarterbacks, Sean Davis. I didn't know they were allowed to recruit big time quarterbacks. And apparently it's allowed that they're allowed to go back to back to back and get really good quarterbacks. Who would have thought?
It's amazing what you can do in Notre Dame if you're willing to put in the work, Double R. It's amazing, crazy, right?
Sean, I was just saying, man, like you got CJ Carr, and I was like, for a second, I'm like, wait, Notre Dame's not supposed to get a kid like that. They're not supposed to get a kid like that. And then they got Deuce Knight, and I'm like, they're definitely not supposed to get a kid like that. Like, definitely not. And then you get Noah Grubbs too, where I'm just like, dude, I think I had been programmed for so long to just expect fine. That's fine. Solid and fine. Those were the words, right? Whether it's great or not great, or somewhere in between, Marcus Freeman has completely upgraded the quarterback play at Notre Dame from a talent perspective. There's no Drew Pines in there anymore, Sean. There's no Tommy Reese's. There's no Brendan Clark's. There's no name other bad backup quarterback that you knew wasn't that good. It's just such a different world, man. It's different.
You know what's even crazier, Double R?
What's that?
They literally had their pick of the litter in 26. I mean, one could say it came down to them having their pick of the litter. And wherever they leaned, the dominoes fell after Noah Grubbs decided to choose Notre Dame and commit to Notre Dame. And we saw dominoes falling in. So that just shows you how far the quarterback position and quarterback recruiting has come, right? Whereas Notre Dame is not picking up scraps. They are actually determining the market and how the dominoes fall in a recruiting cycle. That's amazing.
And Sean, my last point to illustrate the quarterback depth is that you have now strengthened the quarterback room so far that Tyler Buckner wanted to come back, and you're like, you have to play wide receiver, bro. You're not coming to play quarterback. I mean, that speaks to it, man. I mean, we can kind of like, oh, that's funny, but like, actually, you don't need Tyler Buckner to come play quarterback. I once heralded talented quarterback that also was just at Alabama, and I know he didn't play well in his one game at Alabama of real action. But regardless, we're talking about a former top 50 overall recruit, Sean, that didn't pan out. And you're like, you have to go play wide receiver, man. Our quarterbacks are good. Like, we don't need quarterback anymore. We don't need it.
That's amazing. But it just speaks to also that story is almost like bookends, right? Because Tyler Buckner coming back, right?
Yeah.
To go play lacrosse, win national championship, but then to want to be part of the football program. You know, that kid has to be one of the most humble kids you've ever met. Right? I don't know if I would have taken to that. I mean, you have to be a special kid. Like, after failing at a position to come back to the original school in a different sport and then come back and ask to be part of the team. That's a booking because it speaks to how much he respects the leadership in the program, but then it's also a reflection of who he is as a young man and a person. That's absolutely fantastic. So I look at that from two different point of views, man. That's absolute that story. I think if he scores a touchdown as a wide receiver, let's just say somehow, even if it's in mop-up duty, that stadium is going to go bananas. Double R. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, it is.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's just a great place to be with. Again, to recap it, the positives to what Marcus Freeman has done, okay? The positives. Big presence in Texas, getting longer and more athletic everywhere. You have become more consistent in your approach in the Southeast. And quarterback recruiting. Those are the biggest things. Now, Shaun, let's talk about the negatives, man. Because we got to do it. Got to do the negatives, okay? I think there has been some evaluation issues at two different positions over the last couple of years. I think there's a valuation problem, okay? Let's break it down to two. Because one is not directly a Notre Dame coach's fault. And maybe we should go that way. Let's go that way first. Wide receiver, okay? Wide receiver. I literally wrote, this is what I wrote in the article, Shaun, that's going to be live here, okay? The wide receiver recruiting issue isn't as much about Mike Brown, more about the hand he was dealt. It's unclear, but Notre Dame opted to stop pursuing both Cooper Perry and Dalen McCutcheon very early on in the process, two of the more productive and high-floor pass catchers in the 2025 class. The staff also went silent on Texas pass catcher Taz Williams Jr. as well, despite him wanting to take a return visit to South Bend on his own dime. Okay, so that was a first paragraph I wrote, and I wanted to say it this way, Shaun. I don't fully blame, actually, I don't blame much to Mike Brown on this one, okay? But I do think there has been a wide receiver, especially in 2025, I think there's been an evaluation issue, okay? Because I think there was a world that today you could be sitting with Cooper Perry in this class, in a good spot with Dalen McCutcheon, and you could still be recruiting Derek Meadows and Tanuk Hines and all those other guys, right? For whatever reason, Notre Dame became very selective early on in this wide receiver recruiting process, despite not being in the best position with a few guys. And they decided to opt out of a couple of the better, more consistent, polished pass catchers in this class. There has been an evaluation process, I believe, right now, Shaun, because now, due to the Chancey Stuckey issue, Notre Dame is now in a position where you almost have to hit an inside straight on wide receiver recruiting down the stretch. Like, you got to do everything right with Derek Meadows. You have to do a lot right with Dylan Robinson. You have to do a lot right with Tanuk Hines. You can get done. And again, I think that there's a possibility that you can get 2 out of 3 in that class. But there was a major wide receiver evaluation issue, I believe, in 2025, which has been very, very frustrating to me.
And it's interesting to see how you just pointed out where things stood months ago and where things stand now, the possibilities, if they had stayed on Perry and McCutcheon. And now, let's specifically talk about Meadows. Could it be that they moved on from guys because they fell in love with Derek Meadows and his upside, even without the production? Because that's what you talked about with Cooper Perry and McCutcheon. 2 guys that were highly productive. You see it on film, you see it on tape. And so you feel confident in that. And maybe they went away from that because they really truly fell in love with the upside of one Derek Meadows. And that's a possibility. But like you said, I also question whether or not they looked at the board and they felt like they did not, as a staff, want to come into redundancy, because redundancy was a problem last year. I don't know how they look at the film. I don't think looking at the film, I'm sure you don't think looking at the film that would have been an issue if they had stayed on Cooper Perry and McCutcheon. But somehow, some way, the evaluation seems to have come down like that, and they immediately switched to. It was so late in the game, and Mike Brown comes in, and maybe he doesn't have as great a relationship with those young men. So maybe he says, I have a relationship with these guys, right? And now he switches gears to guys that he feels pretty confident I know I can get these guys. And then the guys that I want to work on, I'll continue to work on. And maybe he just really fell in love with Tanuk. Maybe he really fell in love with Derek Meadows. And that's when you have to trust the evaluation, right? Because evaluation is always iffy, right? We can fall in love with kids and then for whatever reason, they just don't work out. It could be a system problem. It could be just a school problem. It could be a lot of different things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But for me, I just think you point out something that is very key. I think moving forward, there's nothing wrong with recruiting in quantity. I think the problem Notre Dame has had in the past is they didn't want to recruit quantity elite players at the position.
Right.
They wanted to focus in on maybe one or two guys. And if they went after a top guy, that was a rarity, in all honesty. Because most of the wide receivers, like Will Fuller, wasn't a top 50 wide receiver when they were recruiting him. I think the first time he came to visit, his host was Malik. And I remember Malik saying he was like a 3-star. And he really didn't want to come. And it was his mom that had Malik talk to him. It was just that was even during the times when Brian Kelly had elevated the program, the wide receiver position, man, just always seemed like an Achilles heel in a sense offensively. Never had a problem with running backs, never had a problem with offensive line. The quarterback position speaks for itself. That wide receiver position, along with the quarterback, really work hand in hand, right? So you expect the improvement in quarterback recruiting to immediately impact the wide receiver. I question this. If Chancey Stuckey had stayed in place, what would have been coming off the class he had in 24, which had created immense momentum, even though there was some redundancy in the class. You still have momentum, especially in the state of Texas, right? How much momentum would they have had to lock up a Tanuk Hines earlier, or to be even in a better position with a Tanuk Hines, another kid from Texas? It's very interesting. Very interesting.
Well, I think that's the most frustrating aspect of it is that, I mean, you talk about 2023, Notre Dame was able to get Jaden Greathouse and Braylon James and Rico Flores and KK Smith, despite the fact that they didn't have a quarterback until very late in the process with Kenny Minchie. But 2024, you got CJ Carr, who was a big-time quarterback, and lo and behold, you got Cam Williams and Micah Gilbert and Logan Saldate. You're like, that's what a wide receiver class should look like. I think my biggest frustration, Shaun, is that Deuce Knight, the big talent that he is and the personality that he has, how were you not able to recruit wide receiver better for Deuce Knight, man? I just don't know how. Again, I know how because of the Chancey Stuckey stuff and the transition and blah 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 blah. But it just, you should not be in the situation you are now where things are, they're not dire. They're not in a situation where it's like doom and gloom, but you are in a situation where you need to do well down the stretch in order to get a semblance of a good wide receiver class. I did want to spend the majority of the time, though, Shaun, and we'll end it on this subject here, okay? Talk about bad evaluations, okay? Everybody has frustration with this one. Defensive line evaluation has been an issue. And it's not just been an issue in 2025. It's been an issue for a couple years now, for being honest with ourselves, okay? He has gotten a commitment, Matt, by the way. Elijah Burris and Jerome Bettis Jr. were both not committed to Mike Brown when he was there, right? Elijah Burris. Yeah, I think they were both after that. So, yes, he's gotten 2 commitments in the class. But here's Shaun, evaluation problem, okay? So, some things I wrote. Al Washington has gotten a couple really nice victories, okay? A couple of really nice victories over the last couple years. They had Boubacar Traore in the 2023 class, which I think was a big victory. 2024, you got Bryce Young. I know you obviously had an inside track on that one, but you still got Bryce Young. You also got Logan Thomas, which I thought was a nice get. You also got Christopher Burgess in 2025. That's dope, man. Good job. Really good stuff. But Shaun, was also a lot of troubling, okay? I wrote in this piece that I don't blame Al Washington for Keon Keeley. I do not blame him at all for Keon Keeley. I just think that was going to happen. I just think it was going to happen, unfortunately. It was a state of the program stuff. It wasn't a state of Al Washington. So Keon Keeley happens, whatever. After that, though, Shaun, I think there were a couple missteps. And missteps not only in the evaluation, because I'll get to the evaluation. I think there were missteps as far as making decisions without solid plans in place. And what I mean by that is 2024, you basically force Owen Wafel out of the class. Okay. You force Owen Wafel out of the class to make room for Justin Scott. Well, Shaun, that sounds great in theory, right? Because Justin Scott is a more talented player than Owen Wafel. But when you force a kid out that's good and you don't get the player you want, that ends up being a pretty bad decision, right? Because then you don't get Justin Scott. Okay. That's one. The next one, CJ May in a similar situation this year of not quite to the degree, but CJ May wanted to take some visits and do whatever, blah, blah, blah. But they basically said, like, we're not going to recruit you anymore. So they basically forced CJ May out of the class. Shaun, again, it's fine if you have a good plan in place. Okay. What was the plan? Who was next? In my opinion, based upon what I'm looking on the outside looking in, I think that they went from CJ May, couldn't find anything. It's my read, at least. And then they said, Dominic Kulak, you're our Viper now, which I think will actually end up being fine. I think it's going to be a similar situation to the Boubacar Traore thing. And so you didn't get a Viper in 2023, but you got Boubacar, who eventually turned himself into a Viper, right? So I think you lucked out there. I think you might like out with Dominic Kulak, but I do not think that Dominic Kulak was initially thought of as the Viper in this class. He was a linebacker hybrid money backer or whatever the heck they call it, right? Like, he was not supposed to be that guy. He became that guy as a default, in my opinion. Okay. Now, after that, Shaun, here's where the evaluation stuff comes in. Okay. So you don't have a Viper in the class, a true one. Notre Dame decides we're not going to recruit Marco Jones as a Viper. All 6'5", 240 pounds of explosive, quick twitch muscle. Like, yeah, no, we don't need you, Marco. Cool. Whatever. He's at Texas A&M now. Great player, by the way. Really good player. And then, Shaun, we didn't talk about this one. Actually, we have talked about this one, but not recently. Jarquez Carter was a kid that had high interest in Notre Dame. High interest in Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame had a chance. They just decided to stop recruiting him for whatever reason. They stopped recruiting Jarquez Carter. 2024, you decided to just cool on Malachi Williams. Again, whatever. That was just a decision I didn't love at the time. You decided to cool on him. Jalen Wiggins, you weren't able to get a traction with him in the 2025 class. Bryce Davis, I don't think that Notre Dame would have got Bryce Davis out of North Carolina, but they just kind of gave up. They were just like, okay, we're not going to try to get you on campus anymore. Like, we just kind of stopped. And then Javion Campbell's another one, Shaun, where I'm just like, I think Notre Dame could have. Am I saying that Notre Dame would have got Javion Campbell in the end? Not necessarily. But what I am saying is that Notre Dame would have pushed from the beginning of finding Javion Campbell and offering him. I think they would have had at least a chance in the end. So from Jarquez Carter, Marco Jones, Javion Campbell, Malachi Williams, there's just been a lot of things that I look at, Shaun, and not having a replacement option plan in effect. And there's just a lot here, man, that I'm just like, I don't really understand the process here. The process just seems kind of flawed and shoddy to me.
It's flawed and shoddy because, honestly, you depend on the results you have. When you have results from a defensive line with two guys that are All-Americans, first, second team, depending upon the magazine or the publication, and their promise for the NFL draft, you feel like you're doing a good job.
Yeah.
But you have to realize
Marquise Lightfoot too, Shaun. I forgot to mention that. Someone put that in the chat. They decided not to pursue Marquise Lightfoot. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So you think about that, and then you point to the fact that maybe that is the direction. That is what you're leaning on. But you can't lean on them because you didn't evaluate them and you didn't recruit them. That's not you, right? So when you're talking to recruits, you have to be able to show them that this is where the rubber is going to meet the road over the next 2 seasons with what you're talking about in the evaluation issue. Because now these are the guys that you evaluated and recruited. Hey, what's going to come of this? Right? Hey, Boubacar Traore could turn out to be a 9-10 sack guy. And all of a sudden, he's on the radar of the NFL. I hope that happens. But that doesn't mean that you don't take the opportunity to go after big-time talent at the position. And like you said, you're looking for a plan. You're trying to figure out what's the direction here, right? Because you see direction when you get a guy like Owen Wafel and a guy like CJ May, but then you retreat. And you don't have a backup plan for the reason you retreat. No one had a problem with you retreating from Owen Wafel because they knew what you expected to replace him with. But you better make darn sure where you sit with that individual before you make that decision. And you better make darn sure that you're like 70, 80% sure that he's coming to your school before you lose a young man like that to Michigan. So that, for me, along with what you just said, is the biggest issue concerning defensive line recruiting. Where are we going? It's nice to get a Sean Civiliano. It's nice to have a Davion Dixon, one guy per class, one big guy that can feel the need, 2 kids from the state of Florida. But where is the quality depth? Where is that coming from?
Right.
Where is it coming from? And I will say this, Notre Dame, is it fair to say Notre Dame can be viewed as a developmental school along the defensive line over the last 10 years with what they have been able to do? They would get kids in 210, 215 pounds. Next thing you know, they're in the NFL 4 years later. And I think under the previous regime, they showed the ability. Now that we know the recruiting aspect, they didn't put in the work. I'm not saying that the previous defensive line coach didn't put in the work, but I think they weren't willing to go after the big guys and work hard enough to get them. But yet still, they fully bought into development. And maybe, I don't know, because we're not part of the coaching conversation, but maybe Brian Smith told us last week. What did Brian Smith tell us last week? That big time defensive tackles, hey, this is what it's going to take to get in the door. Right?
Yeah.
So have they made the decision to take a step back at that decision and truly go developmental? Maybe get in on, some private school kids that they feel like they have a good shot at. I mean, I would be very interested in seeing what the overall plan is, but it seems like from the outside looking in, we can't definitively say what that is.
Well, I mean, that's the frustrating part, Sean. It's like, look, man, obviously you want results in the end, but you also want a solid process all the way through to get to those results, because that's replicable. If you don't have one, then that's not sustainable, right? I mean, that's where my frustration literally comes from, is that it's not that you chose to go a different route than Owen Wavell. It's not that you went with CJ May, because we have also seen Notre Dame over the last couple of years go a different route, and the route works, right? Like, I know that he ended up in the admissions issue with Brandon Hillman, Sean, but like Notre Dame had a plan with Brandon Hillman to basically take Peyton Bowen's spot at that point, right? Like, that plan was there. What happened at wide receiver when what was the kid from Georgia that is playing at Georgia Tech now, the tall receiver? What is that kid's name? What is that kid's name? You know what I'm talking about?
The one with the weird story with his mom.
Isaiah Canyon. Isaiah Canyon. Yeah. So Isaiah Canyon decommits, Sean, or he's commit. Notre Dame already knew who their next wide receiver was going to be. They already had Lucas Aldante ready. Like, they were ready for it. So, they had their next step. Notre Dame, on defensive line, there's too many steps where I just don't understand why this is the process or what the next step is. That's where the frustration lies. And I think that it needs to be a better process, more consistent process. That's my biggest thing here, because I actually believe, personally, just from what I've seen so far, I don't think Al Washington's a bad coach at all, just from a strictly on-field developmental perspective. Everybody from year 1 to year 2 got better this past year. They were better in 2023 than they were in 2022, easily, right? But it's about, recruiting is a part of the game, right? And that's my frustration too, is that I also don't think that Coach Washington is a bad recruiter. I actually think that he connects with kids pretty well. It's the process I think is flawed. It's the lack of focus. It's just so strange to kind of pinpoint exactly what the issue is, but there's an issue there. Like, let's be honest with ourselves. There is an issue there. Hopefully it gets better. Folks,
would you say the defensive tackle position in recruiting is a headache position? It's a headache position.
That would probably be my least favorite position from my experience to recruit, because I think the demand is so much. Sean, I would even say like the spring portal we saw with like Jermaine Lole and Demonic Williams from TCU and like some of these other guys transferring. I will tell you this flat up: the compensation for these players that we were being told what the movement numbers is not equal to the to the level of play on the field, man, like for whatever reason, every school needs to pay quite a bit for some of these players. There's no doubt. It is a very struggling position, to say the least.
Yeah, and I wonder whether or not, the headache is worth it to Notre Dame at that position. You can't avoid the quarterback position. You can't avoid the wide receiver position. But outside of those two positions, look, we just watched a Chiefs team win the Super Bowl, basically having a worse roster than the 49ers, but the best two players at quarterback and defensive tackle.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I agree.
And they both made game changing.
Yes.
So the position, I just need a direction, man. I need to understand where it sits in priority, that position, because it should be high priority the way the game is going.
Yes.
With the passing game, you have to be able to push that pocket from inside, right? That's why the defense is so effective, because of Riley Mills and Howard Cross.
Yeah.
And how they developed and got better. That makes everybody else better. That's going to make Drake Bowen's job. So it's definitely going to make it a little bit easier as a first-time start.
Well, and they're a great sample too, Shaun, because obviously he did not recruit those players. Those players were already there. Mills and Cross were there. But I would say this: the evidence that because I've heard people say this a decent amount on the board and on this channel, and I actually disagree with it a lot, is that people say, "Oh yeah, well Mike Elston laid the groundwork and they developed them." Like, guys, Howard Cross was a strictly rotational player before Coach Washington came. To not give Al Washington any credit for Howard Cross is very misguided, in my opinion. Riley Mills was better with Al Washington than he was without Al Washington. So we have to give him some credit of he did good with it, right? So yeah, I think that there's a balance we need to have of being critical of a person, but also say like he has done some good things. It's just the recruiting process that has been a struggle for me to accept as a player.
Yeah, and I just think it's one of those positions, because of what you said. It is a headache to always consistently have to have NIL conversations, deal with NIL conversations. It has to be uncomfortable just not being able to recruit a kid, right?
Yeah,
just recruit a kid, right? Imagine Gino and the impact he had in his meetings with Deuce. I'm sure there was an NIL conversation, but because of the position and the person that Deuce is, I don't think it had to be ongoing, right? That defensive tackle, you just had defensive lineman decommit from Georgia, commit to USC, decommit from USC, now projected to go back to Georgia. It's like, what are we doing, right? And then the
Shaun,
Damian Shanklin situation, like
that was the most obvious decommitment of all time, by the way. You're talking about Justice Terry.
Oh, heck yeah. Heck yeah. And then you talk about Damian Shanklin, you pointed out, man, Notre Dame was kind of used as a placeholder until the SEC schools came around.
Yeah, Ohio State and the SEC, until I came around.
Now, and that unfortunately is, evaluation once again. You have to know not only the player, but you have to know where you stand with the player. That's part of evaluation as well.
Yeah. I mean, because they basically went all in on Damian Shanklin, which I get, because Damian Shanklin's a really talented football player, but reading the room of like, hey, man, we're kind of his leader for like a couple months here, and he doesn't want to commit to us. You know what I mean? Like there is a reading in the room that definitely needs to happen. Folks, want to get a couple of these super chats, though, and then we're going to get out of here. Again, our last show together here on the Notre Dame Recruiting Hour and the Irish Breakdown podcast. I believe the show will live on, and I'm sure Shaun and some other people will be kind of taking it up after this, but my last show, I should say, on the Notre Dame Recruiting Hour. So we had a couple of super chats from Christopher Hardy. Christopher, thank you so much. She said, thank you, Ryan, for all your hard work on the recruiting beat and breaking things down for IAB Nation. Absolutely, sir. And thank you so much for the super chat. It's very appreciated. We also had Pete Weber with a similar one, Shaun. Thank you, Pete. Really appreciate you, man. Said big thanks to Ryan for all the years of great analysis and coverage. I think I speak for all of us when I say we appreciate all the hard work. You've made IB a special place and will be missed. Thank you, sir. Very, very much appreciated. Just had another one come in. Thank you, Irish for Life 99. Thank you so much for super chats. Thank you, Ryan, for being a part of our IB family. May you continue your success in your professional and personal career. Thank you all so much. Hey, real quick before we get out of here, I just want to let y'all know I appreciate every one of you. Truly do. This has been a great ride. this is not necessarily the end of the ride. I have some cool things locked up, and I know Shaun already obviously knows about the news. I will be sharing it on Twitter, and I'll throw it on the message board as well on July 15th. That is when I am allowed to let it out there, or the announcement to kind of be out there in the universe. But again, I want to thank everybody for this channel so much. We just had another super chat as well from Andy Milton fans. Says, thank you, Ryan, for all the good work. Thank you so much, sir. Very much appreciate you, Nathan. I'm not going anywhere. Like I said, folks, I'll still be on the post-game shows for the most part this year. I might even be covering a Game 4 Irish breakdown. I might be up in the Meadowlands for the Navy game as well. So not fully rid of me yet, but on a full-time, everyday basis. Yes, this will be the last one. Want to thank everybody again, but I also want to thank Shaun Davis, of course. Shaun, it's been fun, my friend. I know this isn't over. The relationship continues, sir, but thank you so much for everything that you've done as well for the show.
I think life is an amazing thing that happen circumstance can bring someone to your life, and the purpose that they're brought into your life, which is work related, all of a sudden blossomed to something a little bit different and bigger. And I think either one of us thought, and just the relationship of having girls, just talking about that, me giving you down the road, this is what to expect because you're at the beginning. It has truly been something that I greatly appreciate. I remember you told me the news. I was like, oh, this is absolutely amazing because no one deserves it more than you. No one deserves the entire blessing more than you and your family. So once again, brothers for life, man. And I'm sure we're going to be having you back on the Recruiting Hour as a guest sometime in the future to talk about some kids. So I'm excited. You're not getting rid of us that easy, Irish fans. You'll see us on the screen together.
Well, the next time I'm on this show, though, Shaun, you're going to have to tell me what's going on in the landscape of Notre Dame football. So that's going to be a little bit different of a vibe, my friend.
It definitely will be film analysis, probably.
Yeah. We had Jeremiah Huggins with a super chat. Thank you so much, Jeremiah. We appreciate you guys. We are about to sign off here for the last time on the Notre Dame Recruiting Hour. Appreciate y'all, man. Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell if you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform and you enjoyed even an ounce of the content that we were able to provide to you, or I've been able to provide for you especially. Please leave a nice review on there. Subscribe to the podcast. No, and boards.irishbreakdown.com. We'll be on there as well. I'm missing. There's like many hitting points, man. Yeah,
yes.
I will be on IB Nation Sports Talk this week, tomorrow for the last time, and then I'll be on the mailbag most likely for the last time as well. Thank you all. Peace out. Talk to you again soon. Maybe not on the Irish Breakdown podcast, but the next venture will come up very soon. Thank you all. Have a great day. Signing out here on the Notre Dame Recruiting Hour.